Hey, I'm Emily. I always thought Mark and I had the kind of relationship you only read about in romance novels. We met right after college, fell in love, got married, and built a life that looked picture perfect from the outside. Mark's a project manager, charming, and honestly, everyone adores him, including me, of course. But life has a funny way of reminding you just how quickly things can unravel. We were celebrating our 5th wedding anniversary, and I wanted it to be unforgettable. So, I planned this amazing trip to a dreamy beach resort I'd been eyeing for months. White sands, crystal clear water, the whole deal. Mark seemed thrilled, or at least, I thought he was. But then, little things started to pop up. He began taking phone calls in another room, texting more than usual. "It's just work, he'd say. But something felt off. "Girl, you're overthinking it. Relax. It's probably nothing." Lisa, my best friend since forever, told me when I called her about it. She's always been the no-nonsense type, tells it like it is without any sugarcoating. Then there was Tom, Mark's colleague, who would occasionally drop hints that Mark had been super stressed out lately. It didn't make sense, but I tried to shake off the unease. We were on vacation, and I didn't want to ruin it with my worries. At first, the trip was perfect: romantic dinners, sunset walks on the beach, laughing until our sides hurt over silly things. It felt like we were reconnecting. One evening, Mark said he was going to the bar to grab us some drinks. I stayed back, soaking in the view, but as time passed, I started to get nervous. When he didn't return, I decided to go check on him. As I approached the bar, I heard laughter, his laughter, but it wasn't just him. A woman's voice, too, familiar, yet completely out of place. My heart sank as I rounded the corner and saw them, Mark and his ex, Sarah, looking way too comfortable, like I didn't even exist, like this wasn't our anniversary trip to celebrate us. Everything clicked in that moment. All the little things I'd brushed off suddenly made sense. I felt my world stop. Later that night, when Mark finally came back to the room, I confronted him. His face was still flushed, whether from laughter or guilt. I couldn't tell. "What the hell was that with Sarah?" I asked, my voice shaking, but loud enough to make my point. "Emily, babe, you're blowing this out of proportion. We just ran into each other. It's nothing," he said, his voice too calm, his smile clearly forced. "Overreacting? Don't treat me like I'm stupid, Mark. I'm not blind. Seriously, you're being paranoid. She's just an old friend." He reached out to hug me, but I pushed him away, fury building up inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept replaying in my head: paranoid, overreacting, but I knew what I saw. I needed to talk to someone who would actually understand. So I called Lisa. It was late, but she picked up on the first ring. "Lisa, I saw him, with Sarah. They were too close." "Emily, breathe. Tell me everything." Lisa's voice was like an anchor, steady in the chaos. I unloaded every detail: how Mark had been acting distant, all the excuses, and finally, seeing him with Sarah. Lisa listened quietly before speaking. It's time to think about your next move, strategically. This isn't just about what happened tonight. This is about your life." "Strategically? What do you mean?" "You need to show him that you're not someone he can manipulate or walk all over. How about serving him divorce papers? Let him know you're serious, that you're done with his games." The idea hit me like a freight train, bold, shocking, but it also felt right, empowering even. "But how? We're still here, in the middle of this supposed romantic getaway," I said, feeling overwhelmed. "Exactly," Lisa replied. "Leave him the papers here. Make it clear you're not playing around, and do it publicly, so there's no hiding what he's done. Let everyone see." The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. With Lisa's help, we drafted the divorce papers online that night. We planned to have them delivered directly to the hotel, ensuring they'd land in Mark's lap at the worst possible moment. The next morning, I acted as if everything was fine, waiting for the right opportunity. When Mark headed out for a swim, I knew it was my chance. I spoke with the hotel manager, explaining the situation briefly. They agreed to help, and the papers would be delivered to Mark at the bar, right in front of his colleagues later that evening. As I walked away from the manager's office, my heart raced, but I felt more in control than I had in days. I wasn't just going to be the woman who stood quietly by anymore. Mark's betrayal was about to become very public, and for the first time, I was standing up for myself. That evening, the bar was bustling, filled with laughter and conversation. I walked in, the divorce papers neatly folded in the manager's hands. He nodded at me subtly, understanding the weight of what was about to happen. I took a deep breath and scanned the room until I spotted Mark, carefree and laughing with his colleagues, as if nothing was wrong. This was it. As the manager made his way toward Mark, I quietly slipped out, determined to find Sarah. It wasn't hard. Word travels fast at a resort like this. I found her lounging by the pool, looking completely unsuspecting. "Relax, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "There's something you need to know about Mark." Her expression shifted instantly, her guard going up. "What are you talking about, Emily?" "He's been lying to both of us," I continued, the hurt clear in my voice, but my stance firm. "I just served him divorce papers. I saw you two at the bar." The color drained from her face as she tried to process my words. "He told me you two were practically separated," she muttered, clearly shaken. "I thought you should hear it from me, not through rumors," I said, turning to leave, giving her space to absorb the truth, the web of lies Mark had spun around us both. Back at the bar, the fallout was swift. Mark's face went pale as he read the divorce papers, his colleagues staring in shock, the murmurs spreading like wildfire. The hotel manager, true to his word, had made the delivery as public as possible, and Lisa, ever the strategist, had already been spreading the news through her network. By the evening, word had reached our circle of friends, as well as Mark's professional connections. The overwhelming support I received was matched only by the palpable disdain for Mark's actions. The consequences hit Mark hard, and fast. Tom, who had been more friend than colleague, felt deeply betrayed. He had vouched for Mark's character at work more than once, and now, he couldn't look him in the eye. "I can't cover for you anymore, Mark. Not after this," Tom said coldly, and shortly after, Mark lost out on a promotion he'd been certain was his. His professional life, like his personal one, began to crumble. As for me, I took this as a sign to start fresh. I left the job where Mark and I had met and joined a new company. It was a chance for a clean slate, a place where I could grow without the shadow of my past. My new colleagues were supportive, and I quickly rose through the ranks, my determination fueled by the freedom of no longer being tied to Mark's deceit. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I caught it and ran with it. Standing on firmer ground, I didn't look back with regret but with understanding. What I had gone through wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something new. The path ahead was mine alone to forge, and I stepped forward with newfound strength and clarity. Life has a funny way of turning the tables when you least expect it. As I embraced my new chapter, Mark's world continued to fall apart. Sarah, stung by the public humiliation and betrayal, wasn't about to let him off the hook easily. She made sure of that. It turned out the deceit ran even deeper than anyone imagined. Sarah had evidence of Mark's involvement in financial fraud, a secret he had carefully hidden. Until now, she took her findings to the authorities, and soon Mark found himself entangled in legal battles. As news of his fraudulent activities spread, it further destroyed what little remained of his reputation, severing the last professional ties that might have survived the scandal of our broken marriage. His financial stability crumbled under the weight of legal fees, and his once expansive social circle dwindled to nothing. It was a harsh reminder of how the consequences of one's actions can extend far beyond what's immediately visible. Meanwhile, my life was heading in a completely different direction. At my new job, I met Alan, a colleague who shared my passion for marketing but, more importantly, respected the boundaries I had come to firmly establish. Alan was different. He listened, supported me, and genuinely cared, not just about our shared work, but about me as a person, my thoughts, my ambitions, my well-being. It was refreshing and invigorating to be with someone who valued me for who I was, not just for what I could offer. We started dating, taking things slowly, learning about each other outside the rush of work. Alan had a way of making me feel seen, something I hadn't realized I was missing until now. It was a healthy, nurturing relationship that grew from mutual respect and understanding, a stark contrast to what I had lived through with Mark. Looking back, I can see how much I've grown. The pain of betrayal had been overwhelming, like a fire I feared might consume me, but instead of letting it destroy me, I used it to forge a new path, one that led to self-discovery and a deeper understanding of my own strength and worth. Mark's downfall, while sad, was a necessary chapter in my life. It was a harsh lesson in the consequences of deceit and the importance of integrity. Now, I stand stronger, more sure of myself, and ready to move forward with clarity and confidence. These were lessons I'd carry with me, but not dwell on. While Mark faced isolation and financial ruin, I found solidarity and success. This journey taught me more than I could have imagined, about resilience, the importance of standing up for oneself, and the incredible power of starting over. Moving forward with Alan by my side and a career that's flourishing, I've come to truly understand the value of my voice and the strength of my spirit. Life is unpredictable, but with every challenge comes an opportunity to learn and grow I did, beyond what I ever thought possible. And that brings us to the end of Emily's journey, from betrayal to triumph. Now, I'd love to hear from you. How do you think you would handle a similar situation if you found yourself in Emily's shoes? Would you choose public exposure, or take a different approach to confronting deceit? Drop your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and let's start a conversation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light.
Can they just sleep on the floor since they're dirty? My son's wife, Linda, said this with an ugly laugh. Beside her, my son Michael also had a disdainful smile. You two can sit on top of some cardboard. Then, she pointed to a piece of cardboard carelessly placed nearby, as if she was dealing with something filthy. I felt a deep revulsion for them both, no matter that they were my own children. I couldn't tolerate it anymore. Estrangement. That word flashed through my mind. Shall we go home? My husband James said, turning around, as if he had read my thoughts. Yes. I don't want to stay here any longer. I replied immediately to his words, eager to get away from these two as soon as possible. It seems we're not welcome, so we'll be leaving. And we'll be estranging ourselves from Michael and the others. That's totally fine with me. And with that, we left without even entering their house, without seeing our grandchildren's faces. A few hours later, while having coffee with James, we enjoyed a peaceful moment. Then, Michael called James's mobile phone. James glanced at Michael's name and chose to ignore the call. Watching this, I smiled, thinking Michael must be facing a hard time now. I am Mary. a 51-year-old working mother with a part-time job. I have a husband, James, and 2 sons. James and I met through our parents' introduction. I was drawn to James, who was kind and serious, and he liked my gentle nature, so we started dating immediately. A few years later, we got married. Soon after, we were pregnant with our first child, Michael.
"You've done well, Mary. Thank you so much,"
he said to me with tears in his eyes. Not only him but also my in-laws praised me, delighted that their first grandchild was a boy, saying, "You did well." 2 years later, we had our second child, Daniel. Both boys, they kept us busy with their energetic antics.
"I got a perfect on the test again."
"Wow, that's amazing, Michael. You've worked hard on your studies, good job." As he grew, he became a child recognized by everyone as exceptional. He studied diligently and had excellent athletic abilities. Meanwhile, Daniel was.
"I heard you helped a kid who was being bullied. You're such a kind soul, Daniel."
"Thanks, Mom. I just had to help them, no matter what." He grew up to be a kind-hearted person, always ready to lend a hand to those in trouble and gentle towards animals. While cherishing their different personalities, we frequently discussed as a family and continued to watch over the paths the two of them would take. Both left home at the time of going to college.
"Being alone at home feels so unsettling. Maybe I should start a part-time job."
That sounds good. It's worth trying something new. Afterward, freed from child-rearing, I consulted with James and decided to start a part-time job. I began working at a nearby supermarket, which seemed to suit me. The work environment was pleasant, and I enjoyed my job. "It's great you found something you enjoy," James said that, looking at me happily. Moreover, he started to take on more household chores, saying,
"We're a dual-income couple now."
He had always tried to help out by doing what he could, seeing me run ragged by our sons. So, I told him, but James just smiled warmly. "You've done more than enough already. You don't have to go to such lengths."
"I love you, Mary, and I want to be useful."
Without any embarrassment, he expressed his feelings. I am grateful to have him and our family as we live our peaceful, everyday life. One day, "I'm coming over to the house." Michael sent such a message out of the blue. Surprised by the suddenness, both James and I, being off work and at home. Therefore, we sent Michael our consent and decided to wait.
It's unusual for him to reach out like this.
Indeed. He didn't even show his face when Daniel was getting married. After leaving home, Michael rarely returned or even contacted us. At most, we informed him last year that Daniel was getting married, to which he just replied, "Understood," and didn't attend the wedding. "Can't get in touch with Michael. Haven't you heard anything?" "No. I've only received understood message from him as well." Both James and I, and even Daniel himself, couldn't get a reply about attending the wedding from Michael, despite numerous attempts. After many attempts by Daniel, he said he's too busy with work to attend. To miss his own brother's wedding? He said, "I won't waste my time for a useless brother." Such a disrespectful message was sent. Seeing that, both James and I sighed deeply. Michael had always looked down on Daniel. Michael, excellent in academics and sports.
Michael is truly amazing.
Michael is our pride. Such was the adoration he received from his grandparents. Watching him play outside.
Such a boyish spirit is good to see. Our grandson is just as expected.
They often expressed such views. On the other hand, Daniel, who enjoyed reading and quietly spent time in his room.
With such nice weather, to stay in the corner of a room.
Such a gloomy child. Frowning, the in-laws said that. I couldn't believe their words and always argued back.
If you say such things, I won't let you see your grandchildren.
James was clear about it, and upon hearing that, the in-laws who wanted to see Michael quickly apologized. Michael was also fond of them, saying,
I want to see Grandpa and Grandma.
So we reluctantly let them meet. Daniel, on the other hand, was close to my parents.
I love being in Grandpa's study and talking with them.
My dad is also a reader, with lots of books in his study, and Daniel would scrutinize which book to read with sparkling eyes every time we visited. And he would happily share his thoughts with him. That's why Daniel preferred going to my parents' house over the in-laws.
Are we going to Grandpa's house next time? Wonder which book I'll read.
But I want to go to other grandparents' house.
Last time we went to my parents' house because Michael insisted on it. This time, we're going to Mary's parents' house.
Both of our parents' homes were within cycling distance, and we tried to visit them equally. Oh, did you go to grandparents' place?
Yeah. I went to return a book. Michael seems to be at Grandpa's house too.
As they grew up, both started to go on their own. Surely, the in-laws were spoiling Michael and bad-mouthing Daniel. Even if we tried to blame them, there was no proof.
Did you go to your father's place again?
No. I was at a friend's house near there. Michael also denied it, saying,
I didn't go. I haven't seen the in-laws.
However, he was undoubtedly influenced by the in-laws and developed a disdainful attitude towards Daniel. Every time he said something oppressive about Daniel, we scolded him, but it seemed futile. What's wrong? Remembering the past, I inadvertently sighed. James asked with concern. It's nothing. Just wondering what he wants. Hopefully, it's not trouble. He nodded at my words. And 4 hours after the scheduled time. He's here.
You're quite late.
You were probably just lazing around anyway. Unabashed, Michael entered the house. Following him was a woman. While we were puzzled by the sudden visit, the two quickly sat down on the living room sofa. Michael, who is this?
My wife, Linda. We got married.
The words uttered by Michael shocked us so much that we exclaimed loudly. Not we're getting married, but we got married as it was announced after the fact.
Normally, you'd come before getting married.
We were in a hurry. Apparently, Linda is pregnant. Now that they mention it, Linda's belly does seem large. So, she wasn't suffering from morning sickness, and we decided to have the wedding before it became noticeable. I understand the situation, but why didn't you tell us? And we weren't invited to the wedding. At our question, Michael sneered unpleasantly. We didn't want to invite such shabby people to our glamorous ceremony. We were stunned by his words. What did Michael just say? Shabby? Us? Exactly as Michael said, truly shabby indeed. Linda said, laughing mockingly as if to ridicule us. Feeling sickened by such behavior. Linda comes from a wealthy family. Her father is a CEO, and I work at his company. Her mother is from a noble family too, so they're in a different class than us. Michael said mockingly. I wonder why he looks down on his own upbringing so much.
Then, what do you want by coming here?
James asked with a cold voice. He must be angry at being ridiculed by them. I told you, Linda is pregnant. Unlike Daniel's wife who can't have children. Daniel's wife, Susan, has been his childhood friend who lived nearby. They started dating in high school and got married right after graduating from college. Susan apparently has a condition that makes it difficult for her to get pregnant.
I'm fine with that. Susan is the only one for me.
And having Daniel is more than enough for me. They had discussed this matter several times. It's Daniel and Susan's issue. As long as the two of them are it, we're not particularly bothered. Yet, bringing this up all of a sudden made me frown. Unlike the worthless Daniel's wife, Linda will give you grandchildren. You should at least show some gratitude, right? Speak clearly. What do you want? A baby gift? It's not just that. Visiting the house and helping out is the role of a mother-in-law, isn't it? Michael said, with Linda joining him in a nasty grin. They're indirectly telling me to come over and do household chores. Then, James silently stood up. It would be an honor to be of use to you. Once James was out of sight, Linda started saying that. Right. Since you'll get to hold your grandchild, it's only natural you do as much. Linda and Michael agreed, leaving me puzzled. If it were Susan, I'd gladly help. But I don't want to assist people who look down on others. Just as I was about to say something, James returned with an envelope in hand. Take this and leave. My wife has a part-time job and doesn't have the time to care for you. Besides, if your family is so prestigious, hire a professional housekeeper. James said this while glaring at them. Michael seemed upset by these words, but took the envelope without saying anything. What a waste of time. Muttering, Michael and Linda left. Watching them go, I sighed deeply, pondering the future. I thought I was careful, but did I raise him wrong? As I felt uneasy about Michael and Linda's attitude, a notification sound came from my mobile phone. It was a message from Susan. We're planning a trip with Daniel. Would you like to join us? A lovely invitation message with cute stickers. Feeling healed by it, I replied, Thank you for the invitation. Would you like to come over for dinner? They were delighted by the invite, so we decided to have Daniel and Susan over for dinner. Thank you for inviting us today. I love Mary's cooking, so I'm really happy. We welcomed them at the agreed time and had a lively dinner, during which we talked about Michael and Linda. That wife, could she possibly be? Susan muttered, having heard our story. Apparently, Susan works at the same company as Linda's father. So, she knew of Linda's existence, though in a different department. According to Susan, Linda is infamously known for the bad reasons. I did hear she was going on maternity leave, Susan mentioned. Daniel seemed thoughtful beside her. Thanks for letting me know. They might contact me next. It's good to be prepared. Indeed, if Michael couldn't make me a housekeeper, he might next tell Daniel. Send Susan over as a housekeeper. If Susan gets outed as an employee at the same company, they might say, do it if you don't want to be fired. So, Daniel, make sure you protect her. Daniel nodded firmly at his words. Several months later, I receive another message from Michael on my mobile phone. Our child has been born. So, we're having a baby gift event at our new home. We're inviting you too as a courtesy. Such a condescending message was sent. Honestly, I don't feel like going. But he is my son, after all. Well, I guess we'll attend, but only out of obligation. Right. We'll decide our future relationship based on their attitude at the baby gift event. We agreed to participate in the baby gift and visited their new home using the address provided. Welcome. Ah, so you did came. It sounds like you're surprised we actually showed up. Greeted by Linda and Michael at the door. James responded to their greeting, which was met with an insincere smile and, not at all. Well, come in. But upon entering, there's no sight of our grandchild. Asking them about it, we're told the child is out with Linda's parents. Please wait in the living room until the parents return. However, as we were about to sit down, Linda stopped us.
Wait! That's my parents' seat.
Then where should we sit? Linda pointed to the floor in response to my question. Do you mind sitting on the floor since you're so dirty? She said this with a disgusting laugh, with Michael also smirking unpleasantly beside her. You two can sit on cardboard, pointing to a carelessly placed piece of cardboard nearby, as if we were something dirty. Such behavior deeply disgusted me. As much as he is my own child, I can no longer tolerate it. Disownment. That word crossed my mind. Should we leave? James, sensing my thoughts, turned to me and suggested. Yes. I don't want to stay here any longer. I immediately agreed with his words, because I wanted to get away from these two as soon as possible.
Since we're obviously not welcome, we'll leave. And we'll be disowning both of you.
That's totally fine with me. And so, we left without even entering their house, without seeing our grandchild's face. Once home, I blocked Michael's contact. Immediately, I called Daniel and told him about what had happened. Daniel and his family were also invited to the same baby gift event. I thought I'd warn them before they arrived at the new home. Got it. Thanks for letting me know. He responded coldly and hung up. Daniel resembles me in appearance, but his demeanor is all James. Normally calm, he treasures Susan deeply. But once he gets angry, he's uncontrollable. Michael had once angered Daniel and suffered terribly because of it.
Forgetting that, he's probably getting ahead of himself.
Let's have some coffee, shall we? Sure, I'd like that. Several hours later, James and I spent a leisurely time drinking coffee. Then, Michael calls James's mobile phone. James looks at Michael's name briefly before deciding to ignore it. Watching him, I can't help but think Michael is probably facing a tough time right now, and I smiled at the thought.
Hey, where are we going for our next trip?
Let's go somewhere famous this time. James responds with a smile to my question. And time flows by leisurely. Then, I get a message from Susan.
What's up?
It's from Susan. She's asking if she can come over now. Is that okay?
Of course, let her.
After giving our consent, Daniel and Susan arrive a few minutes later, both grinning broadly.
You two seem very cheerful.
Looks like you've had quite the rampage.
Yes. Oh, I recorded it, so you must watch.
Responding to our words, Susan shows us the video on her mobile phone with a smile. The recording starts with Daniel ringing the doorbell. The door's unlocked, just come in. Hearing that, Daniel and Susan enter the house. Reaching the living room.
Wait, aren't you the famous novelist?
A man and woman, presumably Linda and her parents, looked at Daniel's face in surprise. Daniel, a book lover, had become a novelist. His work won a Newcomers Award, and there were talks of media adaptations. He had appeared on TV due to this. The other family must have recognized him from TV. Seeing such a person suddenly show up seemed to shock them. What? Daniel is the novelist everyone's talking about? Not only Linda and her parents were surprised, but Michael, his brother, was too. Michael and Daniel hadn't seen each other in years. For Michael, Daniel was still the same as in his memories, and even seeing his changed appearance on TV didn't ring a bell. Since he only published under a pen name, they didn't realize it was him until they met in person.
I'm a fan of yours,
Linda said with a beaming smile. Linda's parents, Brian and Karen, also expressed their joy.
We're delighted to have such a popular novelist in the family.
What?
Become family with someone who ridicules their parents? I don't think so.
Daniel told them with a very nice smile. Suddenly, the other family froze. Then, it was Daniel's turn.
I know what you said about our parents. You made quite a mockery of them.
His words caused Linda's parents to frown. Unaware, Michael muttered back.
So you admit you're really shabby? What's so shabby? Are you saying your family is superior?
He coldly countered. Even through the video, Michael's discomfort under Daniel's intense gaze was palpable, and he averted his eyes.
Dad and Mom loved us equally, recognized our individuality, and supported us. Yet, you always been complaining.
That's
spoiled rotten by grandparents who indulged his every whim.
Daniel didn't let Michael get a word in, continuing to speak. Our reprimands, thinking of Michael, spoken behind our backs. Supporting Michael's desired university and arranging tutorials as he wished. We didn't make him struggle for tuition and gave him plenty of pocket money. Realizing how much we were watched over moved me.
You acted as if it was all due to you, but it wasn't. Our parents helped Michael out of genuine love. I can't understand Michael's disdain for them.
Daniel spoke non-stop. Michael was left speechless by his words. Then, he turned his gaze to Linda's parents, continuing.
And you? What kind of upbringing have you given your daughter? Mocking someone's parents, not inviting them to the wedding, only announcing a pregnancy, and then demanding money and care.
Michael and Linda looked troubled by these words. Before they could say anything, Brian spoke up.
Michael, I was told by you that my parents are bad influences on their children and didn't pay for education.
It seems Linda's parents were told by Michael that they only exploit me and have never done anything parental. That's why he always stayed with his grandparents. Not inviting them to the wedding was also because they might cause trouble and inconvenience others. Hearing Michael's explanation, Daniel deeply sighed.
Still painting the parents as the villains, huh? What exactly have those two exploited from you, Michael? The reason you went to Grandpa and Grandma's was because they spoiled him and gave him allowance.
Daniel said, causing Linda's parents to exchange looks.
If you've read my novel, you'd know who's more credible, right? It's about my gratitude towards my parents and overcoming the mockery from my grandparents.
Linda's parents nod at Daniel's words. Beside them, Linda makes a puzzled face.
Really?
Just from that, it's clear Linda hasn't read Daniel's book. How you can that you're my fan who even haven't read my book? He murmurs, sighing again. Then, he turns to us, or rather, to Susan, who is recording.
Let's go. Staying here any longer is pointless.
Yes, let's. The video ends there. Daniel, well said. You're my pride. James says after watching, and Daniel smiles happily. Immediately after finishing the video, loud noises came from the entrance.
Why are you ignoring my calls? What have you done?
Michael and Linda enter, yelling. Ah, that's right, I had given Michael a spare key. They must have used it to get in.
What do you want?
Daniel frowns at the noisy pair, ignoring them.
Susan, would you like a refill on your coffee?
Oh, no, thank you, don't bother.
Don't be shy.
James and I ignore the two, surprising Daniel and Susan. Meanwhile, Michael and Linda, oblivious to our reaction, start ranting.
It's all because of that woman. I got scolded by Dad.
It seems something Susan left behind has put them in a tight spot. That parting gift was an internal investigation at the company.
That's right. Because of what was written, my path to becoming the next CEO is now closed.
Apparently, not only Linda, but Michael's reputation was also bad. Initially, Michael worked diligently, but after marrying Linda, he became arrogant, claiming,
"I'm the next CEO."
It seems the people around him could no longer keep up with him.
"You've really done it now."
Linda was known for flirting with men at work and pushing her work onto them. If anyone disobeyed, she used her status as the CEO's daughter to pressure them into resignation. Thus, no one dared to refuse her requests. Furthermore, she would harass any woman who even slightly stood out. They left behind documents recording their deeds. Moreover, Linda's choice in men was questionable.
"But whether that child is Michael's, I really can't say."
Leaving those words, Susan had left their house. Hearing Daniel and Susan's story, and presented with evidence, the other parents were furious. They ousted the two from the company, declaring,
"You're disowned. If things stay this way, we'll be kicked out of that house too. Even the child might be taken away by my parents."
Apparently, Michael's new house was a baby gift from Brian. From the level of their anger, it seemed likely they would lose the new house as well. If that happens, Linda and I won't be able to raise the grandchild, was the concern. It's getting colder recently. I can't wait to warm up with a trip.
Right. By the way, Mary and I were discussing where to go. Do you have any place in mind?
Ignoring Michael and Linda, we continued to speak cheerfully to Daniel and Susan. At that moment, Michael looked at us for the first time, puzzled.
"Dad? Mom? We were thinking, since it's a special occasion, why not go somewhere famous?"
"If you two don't mind, how about staying overnight?" Michael spoke to us in a hurried manner, but we ignored him. After a brief struggle and receiving no response, "Let's go. Staying here is pointless."
"Wait! What?"
With shoulders slumped, Linda and Michael left.
"We need to change the locks,"
James muttered as the door closed. Daniel and Susan exchanged glances.
"How about moving in with us? It might be better, considering they could come back."
Apparently, they had been considering living together for a while. We joyfully accepted their offer, sold this house, and moved in with them. Thanks to that, we no longer had to deal with Michael and Linda's disturbances and enjoyed a peaceful life. Soon after, they both were supposedly fired from the company. The president himself came to apologize. "I'm sorry for not noticing my daughter's foolishness," he said. We were also apologized to by Linda's parents. They regretted misunderstanding us and not greeting us properly. Perhaps her parents weren't bad people. However, Brian being busy with his company and Karen running her beauty salon, they didn't spend much time with Linda. As a result, Linda developed such a personality. When they came to apologize, I asked how the two were doing. Michael and Linda, kicked out of the new house, went to their old house but found it sold. Stunned, they somehow managed to rent an apartment. Then, they started job hunting to make a living, but in such circumstances, they couldn't raise a child. Therefore, Linda's parents considered taking the child in but declined, saying, "We are not qualified to raise a child." So, it was decided that Daniel and Susan would take the child in. Fortunately, the child, William, truly is our grandchild, having Michael's blood.
"It seems they intended to push the childcare onto me from the start. They usually left it to Karen or professionals. I'll raise him well,"
Susan said, holding William lovingly. Daniel was also eager to participate in raising him. Taken in by them, he is bound to be happy. I plan to support them as much as I can. Sometime later, Daniel received a message from Michael. "Now I understand how foolish I've been." Following this incident, Michael and Linda, whose relationship soured, divorced. Becoming lonely made Michael reflect on his actions. but regretting now is too late. When I said William and his parents wouldn't meet him, he was visibly disappointed. His repentance didn't seem genuine. According to Daniel, his attempt to show a changed heart seemed more like a plea for help for himself. Michael hasn't changed. So, we can just leave him be. Indeed, my parents influenced Michael negatively, but he's old enough to take responsibility. We won't reach out to him anymore. Thus, he was abandoned by us. He vanished into the entertainment district, having no one to rely on. But that's none of our concern anymore. As for Linda, despite being disowned by her parents and divorced from Michael, she couldn't lower her standard of living and ended up in debt. Unlike Michael, she didn't have our contact information, and being disliked by those around her, she couldn't seek help from anyone. Eventually, she was forced into tough jobs introduced by debt collectors. Well, it's none of our business, I muttered, watching William sleep in my arms. Several years later.
Looking forward to the trip.
I never thought it would be postponed this much, James replied, nodding to James's words about the trip we had promised back then. We had just taken in William and were busy with moving and other things, so it had been postponed.
Right when we thought we'd settled down, Susan got pregnant.
We all celebrated that time. When William was about 3, Susan's pregnancy was discovered. Having 2 grandchildren filled us with joy. And now that Emily, William's sister, has grown a bit, we could finally go on that trip.
Grandma, Grandpa, I'm excited about the trip.
While talking with James, William runs over with a beaming smile. And we returned the smile to William, who talked with such happiness. William, you know you shouldn't run, right?
He is full of energy.
Daniel and Susan approach, saying this. In Daniel's arms is Emily, who reaches out her hand towards William as they get closer. The sight of the siblings getting along so well warmed our hearts.
Then, shall we go?
We nod at Daniel's words. And we start walking with smiles on our faces. There might be many challenges ahead. But I'm confident we can overcome anything as a family, supporting each other. I'm taking the air, the young master. Here's your settlement, $10,000. As she threw the wad of cash at me, my best friend Amanda burst out laughing. Clutching her stomach, she seemed genuinely amused from the bottom of her heart. James is crazy about me. He said you're just a plain, uninteresting woman. I see. I gave a small nod. I had a feeling that was the case. My marriage to my husband James was not a love match. It was simply because James' father William, the chairman of a major corporation, took a liking to me and made me James' wife. Given James' personality, a woman like me must bore him to death. In contrast, Amanda has a glamorous appearance and is fun to talk to. I can understand why James likes her. Hey, don't you want the money? Amanda grinned, as if dangling bait in front of a stray dog. But she wasn't the only one who started laughing. The lawyer who had been silent beside me also burst into loud laughter, pointing at Amanda. My name is Dorothy. I was originally a doctor working at a hospital, but the chairman recognized my work ethic and I became his son's wife. That was 2 years ago. My husband James takes advantage of being the son of a major corporation and spends his time playing around. On paper, he has the same title of doctor as me, but I've never seen him actually treating patients. What's wrong? Sighing like that. It's nothing. One time, I was on the phone with my best friend Amanda while doing household chores. As I made stew in a pot, I said, "The chairman, my father-in-law William, is coming over tonight. But James is so caught up in his playtime that he shows no sign of coming home on time. That's definitely not good." On the other end of the line, Amanda's voice turned grim.
I'd go look for him, but I'm not done cooking yet.
Wait a second. Amanda sounded surprised.
Doesn't the housekeeper do the cooking?
That's how it appears to the world, but the reality is different. I replied with a sigh. James had hired a housekeeper when he was single, and he left everything, not just cooking, to the housekeeper to take care of his personal affairs. But after marrying me, James fired that housekeeper, and so he pushed all the household chores onto me, his wife.
You'd be bored staying home all the time, right?
He would say with a sneer. I was perplexed. Because I had intended to continue working as a doctor after getting married. But in reality, I'm so swamped with housework that I can't leave the house. Living in a high-rise apartment may look like a dream from the outside. But the truth is, it's like being a caged bird.
I thought you'd be living a better life. But you haven't told James' dad about this?
How could I possibly tell him? Even if he's such a philanderer to William, James is his only son. William doesn't know the reality of our married life. So even now, thinking it's for James' livelihood, he sends money to hire a housekeeper. But all that money vanishes into funds for James to play around with.
Getting married to someone favored by the parents sure has its hardships too.
Amanda murmured, sounding conflicted.
You never know what kind of man you'll end up with until you're actually married. And Dorothy ended up with a real dud in terms of character.
Her voice was mixed with pity and exasperation. Since my student days, I had been indifferent to romance. Knowing this, Amanda was likely thinking to herself, Dorothy had no eye for men. In fact, Amanda started saying things like this.
I wouldn't make that kind of mistake though. Mistake? You gotta do your research before dating someone. Men put on an act, so you can't be fooled by their nice demeanor.
Her tone was slightly condescending. We've known each other since our student days, but Amanda has this side to her. According to her, since she was born 2 months earlier, she's the senior one. But at the same time, her advice is often off the mark, including this time.
William kept pushing ahead with the wedding preparations, so I wasn't in a position to say I wanted to break it off. You thought about breaking it off?
Amanda asked, sounding surprised. That's right. I had no intention of marrying James. Having stated that fact aloud myself, I was made aware of it anew.
Why didn't you break it off then?
Amanda, who likes to pry despite not grasping the essence of things. The stew was ready. Turning off the heat, I continued speaking.
I felt like we weren't a good match.
What?
So, the moment I met James, I knew I couldn't fall in love with him.
I confessed straightforwardly. At that moment, a brief silence falls. The one to break the silence was Amanda.
You mean like intuition?
I guess so.
Anyway, it wasn't about his looks or personality or anything like that. I just felt James and I weren't suited to be husband and wife.
How luxurious, Amanda said with a groan.
Then you should have given that marriage proposal to me.
I really should have. They both like flashy things, so surely Amanda and James would make a better match. Imagining it made me a little envious.
Oh, William will be here soon, so I need to set out the food. Wow, sounds rough.
After a deflated response, we end the call. Everyday life immediately resumes. James doesn't come back. With no choice, I welcome William alone.
Is James not here?
Seems he's busy with work. I have no choice but to fib. In terms of education and job title, James is an outstanding person. The reality is he pushes work onto his subordinates and doesn't even show up to the office, but William doesn't know that. So even now, he praises the food I made like this.
It's a shame I can't directly thank the person who made this meal. I'll pass along the message.
Suppressing my welling frustration, I reply. William smiles and says to me,
Then please tell them this. Thank you always for taking care of my son, and the food was delicious.
Certainly. Nodding, I secretly clench my fist. Those words should rightfully be directed at me. Later on, it seems Amanda made contact with James. Her first words over the phone were,
Dorothy's husband is handsome, huh? You met James? I mean, from what I heard, he sounds like an awful husband, right? That actually made me curious.
It was an opinion typical of Amanda with her strong curiosity. Dismayed, I still wait for her next words.
His personality didn't seem that bad, but his fake pleasantry smile was definitely suspicious. That was clearly an act. You can tell from a smile?
Hearing that, Amanda's voice took on a proud tone. I can tell.
Well, there are a few other tricks too.
In that manner, Amanda went on a one-sided spiel about her assessment of James, and then the call ended. In the now quiet room, I think to myself, Amanda met James. That was all there was to it. But for some reason, that fact caught in my chest and raised questions. I recall a feeling I had before. That James and Amanda would surely make a good match. No way. Shaking off the bad premonition, I returned to the housework. A housewife doesn't have the luxury to indulge in sentimentality. Even in my doctor days there were physically demanding aspects, but on top of that, housework includes manual labor too. However, this is something other housewives won't accept even if I tell them.
What? Manual labor is something the husband should do, no?
The neighborhood ladies said with a laugh, and in the first place, many families living in this class of high-rise employ housekeepers. Not being understood is painful too, huh? Once again, my hand wiping the window stops. I notice tears have welled up in my eyes.
What are you doing? Huh?
A voice from behind startles me. Looking at the clock, it was already time for James to come home. Although usually he's too absorbed in his playtime and doesn't return until late at night. Today of all days, he seems to have properly come home on time. Loosening his tie, James says,
Is dinner ready?
Sorry, I forgot. Saying that, I dash to the kitchen. Just as I'm about to open the fridge, James says in a bothered tone,
Never mind. Let's eat out today. Anything you want to eat?
Not really.
Then the nearby restaurant is fine.
Saying that brusquely, James took me to a high-end restaurant. Normally a reservation would be required, but James is a regular, so they make an exception for him.
This is the restaurant where you proposed to me.
Suddenly feeling nostalgic, I mention it.
Is that so?
His voice feigning ignorance makes me give a wry smile. Thinking he must be embarrassed, I look at his face. In that instant, disappointment flashed through my mind. James doesn't seem to remember proposing to me. With a surprised look, he says,
Didn't Dad just bring the marriage certificate and it was over once we signed it?
Maybe so. Still crestfallen, I nod. That's not true. I wasn't keen on this marriage. So I had intended to find a chance to confess my true feelings to James. I thought even William would reconsider if he heard from James that he wanted to call off the engagement. However, right before that, James called me out to this restaurant and proposed. I was shocked. It was unexpected and made me happy too. So I accepted this marriage. And yet, James, the key person, has completely forgotten about it.
Come to think of it, I met someone today who said she was your friend.
You mean Amanda?
Yeah, that was her name.
James nodded as if confirming his own memory. She was beautiful. Wasn't she?
Oh, I was surprised. She had a youthfulness that belied being over 30.
James said, sounding impressed. I figured as much. Amanda is single, but it's not like men don't hit on her. Rather the opposite, she's always blessed with new boyfriends. What did you two talk about?
Well, she got mad at me, telling me not to trouble my best friend so much.
James lowered his eyes, looking uncomfortable. That gesture was boyish and somehow charming. However, that wasn't the important part.
Amanda, what have you done? Dorothy?
Though James seemed puzzled, I was too preoccupied to care. I had told Amanda not to tell anyone. Yet she apparently shared my complaints about him to James himself of all people. You don't need to mind what Amanda said. But...
Excuse me, valued customers.
The restaurant staff approached.
We request that you please keep your voices down. Oh, okay.
Taking the opportunity of being warned, we placed our order. The chef's recommended course, it was the restaurant's signature course, with the dishes determined by the ingredients procured that day. I wonder what will come out today.
Who knows?
I excitedly awaited the food. However,
excuse me. Is there a problem?
The staff remained unperturbed, but my face had likely turned somewhat pale. What was brought out was a course meal for one person.
I'm the worst as a husband, huh?
James said as he started eating. I hurriedly denied his words. I didn't say that much. I did grumble a bit, but Amanda's way of speaking involves exaggeration. Don't take it seriously.
So it's true that you complained?
Hanging my head, I reply. Yes.
You can't even satisfactorily handle a single household chore, can you? Today I just happened to forget, that's all.
I always properly make meals and wait for James to come home. However, usually even if the food gets cold, James doesn't return, so I eat alone and warm up James' portion in the microwave for him to eat later. Day after day of that. It certainly lacked fulfillment. So unintentionally, I forgot to make dinner today. To be told I'm habitually neglecting housework as a result is disheartening.
I was wrong to forget to cook and to complain about you to a friend. But I don't recall deserving this treatment. We need to be quiet in this restaurant.
Ignoring my side of the story, James said that. I silently waited for James to finish eating, desperately enduring the rumbling of my empty stomach, lest I let my guard down. On the way home, despite sitting in the passenger seat, James felt so distant. In reality, his feelings had likely long since left me. While driving, James spoke.
You said it was fine to give me to Amanda, didn't you?
That's dash. That's not something I brought up. Amanda had merely said it as a joke. Before I knew it, all of Amanda's words were being twisted in a way unfavorable to me. It couldn't be that Amanda. I shake my head, denying the worst possibility. No way, because Amanda has been my best friend since our student days. She would never betray me. I desperately try to convince myself of that. However, immediately after, James said, "Can we break up?"
What?
I've decided to remarry Amanda, you see. The car stops. A figure swiftly gets into the back seat. My heart leaps. There's no mistake. The one who got in was Amanda. Casually crossing her legs in the seat, she says, "James told you, right? If you get it, then get out of the car."
No way!
Stunned speechless, the two repeatedly told me to get out of the car. Overwhelmed by the pressure, I ended up exiting the vehicle. The car immediately speeds off. Left behind on the dark road, I stand there in a daze for a while. By the time I come to my senses, I had started crying. With a hoarse voice dried out from tears, I call a friend. Thomas? Due to circumstances, I can't go home. Come pick me up.
What's that about?
My friend Thomas didn't seem to grasp the situation well. Even so, he apparently sensed from my tearful voice that it wasn't an ordinary occurrence.
Got it. I'll come get you right away.
Please. Ending the call, I crouched at the side of the road. Eventually, a single car arrives.
Dorothy.
Thank you, Thomas. By Thomas's car, I was somehow able to return to my parents' home. During the ride, Thomas didn't ask me about the circumstances. My parents were shocked to see me with eyes swollen from crying.
Dorothy, what on earth happened?
Actually, I began to explain the situation bit by bit. When she finished, Dad stood up, furious.
I'm going to James' parents right now to settle this. Calm down.
Thomas, the only one keeping his composure, tried to soothe Dad. Thomas was a lawyer. He likely judged that acting rashly would put me at a disadvantage.
Can you let me handle this?
Thomas, thank you. I'm counting on you. I replied, wiping away her tears. Just 3 days later, divorce papers arrived from James.
What a jerk!
Dad was angry, but James didn't marry me because he loved me in the first place. Rather than continuing a sham marriage, maybe it was better to separate, I thought. But what worried me was my best friend, Amanda. Amanda seemed intent on kicking me out and becoming James' new wife herself. In other words, the words I thought were a joke were Amanda's true feelings.
Amanda, you betrayed me.
She must have been enamored with the wealthy James over our long friendship. If that's the case, there's nothing I can do about it.
Thomas, I'm leaving this matter to you.
Got it. Together with Thomas, I headed to James' high-rise apartment. The place was overflowing with Amanda's belongings. Amanda sat on the sofa, buried in designer handbags.
Well, look who's here. I have something to discuss too.
Oh, really? Amanda feigned surprise. James stood against the wall, glaring at Thomas. He had disliked the elite Thomas for a while now. James likely felt inferior, knowing he only succeeded thanks to his family status. James barked like a cowering small dog.
So since I dumped you, you're moving on to that guy.
This is business. Thomas replied calmly.
I'm here today as a lawyer for your wife.
Those words, how reassuring they were to me. The term wife reflected Tom's character of clearly separating public and private matters.
If you have a lawyer, it'll be quick, right?
Amanda opened her mouth mockingly.
You want compensation money from the divorce trial, don't you? That's not it.
No need to hold back. Here. Saying that, she carelessly took something out and threw it at me. I will take the heir, the young master. Here's $10,000 in settlement money. It hit my foot, making a faint sound. It was a bundle of bills. Seeing me stunned, Amanda burst out laughing. To the triumphant Amanda, an unexpected voice came flying.
The heir is Dorothy.
Huh? A dumbfounded moment passed. Thomas started laughing as loudly as Amanda. I looked at James. He too had a look of disbelief on his face.
That's ridiculous. I'm Dad's son.
That's right. Tom nodded once, then continued his explanation.
However, this is the decision of the conglomerate's chairman, your father. Don't talk nonsense. Why would Dad?
Even as he retorted, James' face gradually turned pale. He must be thinking, it can't be. Amanda also seemed shaken by Tom's words. To the two of them, Tom said in a businesslike tone.
The chairman knew everything. What did you say?
James finally started trembling violently. It's no wonder. Looking back on his deeds up until now, they were all things that would tarnish the conglomerate's prestige. Even James must know that. And if William had grasped all those actions.
The chairman said he had been waiting for the day James would have a change of heart. But with this incident, the chairman judged that a change of heart was hopeless. Wait. I'll talk to Dad right now.
Compared to Tom's clear voice, James' voice was pathetic.
At the same time, the chairman highly valued Dorothy's dedication thus far and appointed her as the guardian of his grandchild. Grandchild? Dad doesn't have a...
James stopped mid-sentence, seeming to understand. James looked at me with a surprised face. I nodded.
William's successor isn't you. It's your child inside my belly. You never said a word about having a child,
said James, flustered.
I was going to tell you soon. I never thought I'd end up telling you like this, though.
Even as I answered, there was a sense of emptiness. James and I are already over as husband and wife. Maybe we were over from the start. In any case, I felt sorry for the child that would be born between such parents.
You said you didn't see Dorothy as a woman.
Amanda, enraged, yelled at James. Still looking bewildered, James said in a hurry.
I have an obligation to leave an heir. What will you do if that heir takes your position? I never even thought about it.
The two exploded in anger at each other. I said, exasperated.
Until this child comes of age, I will be the organization's representative. In other words, Dorothy is essentially the successor.
Tom added cleverly. James, his face pale, asked tremblingly.
So what happens to me now? Naturally, you'll have to step down from your current position. That seat belongs to Dorothy.
Saying that, Tom took out some documents from his briefcase and showed them. They all had the chairman's signature.
Oh no!
James, upon receiving and checking the documents, collapsed on the spot. The documents slipped from James' hands and fluttered in the air. Someone swiftly grabbed them. It was Amanda.
If we tear this up, it'll be meaningless,
she said, tearing the documents in anger. Yet Thomas remained unfazed.
Those documents are copies. What? The real documents are with the chairman. Now, go to the chairman. And try tearing up all the documents.
Clear provocation and contempt were contained in those words. Amanda screamed.
There's no way we can do that.
Just give up, Amanda said firmly. It's all been decided, Thomas stated with finality. Thomas turned on his heel. And I followed suit, starting to walk away. From behind, I heard James' weak, pleading voice.
Wait. Let's call off the divorce. That child needs a father. Right?
Maybe if you were a normal dad. I didn't even bother turning around anymore. With my back still turned, I said. But you?
You'll only be a bad example for this child.
But you?
You'll only be a bad example for this child. Dorothy, don't say that. I'm the kids.
He was probably trying to assert that he was the dad. Interrupting his voice, I declared.
This child has no dad. Don't be ridiculous.
His weak voice suddenly turned angry.
If it's not my kid, then they can't be the successor, right? That's right. That's why William made his decision. James got into a car accident and is gone now. At least, that's what we'll announce to the public. What the hell is that?
Weakness and confusion returned to James' voice. Yes. That's how it should be, James.
If we reveal the truth as is, it will tarnish the prestige of the conglomerate. That's why the chairman is using the accident as a pretext to exile you and entrust everything to his grandchild. But this man is still alive,
Amanda said desperately. With my hand on the doorknob, I replied, "Why don't you turn on the TV?"
The news about James being in an accident should be on by now. No way!
The boldness vanished from Amanda's usually assertive voice. Thomas and I left the room. Walking side by side down the hallway, I asked,
"What's going to happen to James now?"
"Who knows?
Maybe he'll be given a new identity and have to start over from scratch."
Thomas's tone had returned to its usual casual manner. His job was done. Now, my job was waiting for me. Many media outlets had jumped on the story of a former doctor who had lost her husband in an accident and would now live as the guardian of his child. After all, there was already a high level of social interest in me to begin with. An unknown doctor catches the eye of the chairman of a conglomerate and becomes his son's wife. That alone was already impactful enough.
How do you feel right now? Me? Not much. I just feel sorry for my son.
I conveyed my true feelings to the reporters pointing their microphones at me. In my arms was the newborn figure of my son, Brian.
This child doesn't like the sound of camera shutters. Sorry about that.
Brian was now an important figure who single-handedly carried the future of the conglomerate on his shoulders. I couldn't afford to draw his ire. I made my way through the waves of reporters surrounding my home. I got into the company car and headed to work.
"Excuse me."
The car stopped midway and a woman got in. It was Deborah, the babysitter who would take care of Brian in my place. "Thanks for your help again today."
"Of course."
Nodding, Deborah held Brian close. Brian let out a happy laugh. A smile also appeared on Deborah's face.
"I can't believe he's become so attached to me."
Your sincerity got through to him. When I said that, Deborah smiled. With someone like her, I can entrust my son with peace of mind. The car started moving again. My new workplace is the space James used to dominate. However, his subordinates had the worst impression of him. When I arrived at the office, one of the subordinates who had just come to work spoke to me.
"Good morning, Dorothy."
"Good morning." I returned the greeting in the same manner. We walked together, chatting casually.
"I'm so glad you're here, Dorothy,"
the subordinate said with a deep sense of relief. I gave a wry smile. "Oh, you're exaggerating."
"No, James just dumped all the work on us and did nothing himself. To be honest, he was a nuisance."
The subordinate's true feelings. I felt a chill in my heart. I'll work hard so I don't get the same evaluation.
"Yes."
The subordinate's face, nodding in agreement, was filled with expectation and trust. For now, I'm adored by my subordinates. But it's not because I'm capable. It's simply a psychological response of expecting the next boss to be better because the previous one was so bad. I need to stay on my toes. Muttering to myself, I started my desk work. Because James had been slacking off, work was greatly stagnant. Just getting through it required a lot of time and effort. I went to see Brian after work. I could have had him wait at home, but I wanted to see Brian during my break, so I had Brian and Deborah wait in a separate room. Also, at home, we would be surrounded by reporters. Having them accompany me was also about protecting them.
"Dorothy."
"Where's Brian?" When I asked Deborah, who had approached me, she showed me Brian in her arms. Brian was sleeping peacefully. He's sleeping so well.
"He's such a good boy."
Is that so? I couldn't help thinking that it was good he didn't resemble James. Brian's features definitely had traces of James. Maybe his personality will end up being similar too. I had a moment of such anxiety. I wonder who Brian takes after. Sleeping so peacefully like this.
It's definitely you, Dorothy.
You think so? A heartwarming moment passed. It was when I left the office and headed for my ride. Dorothy. Suddenly, a man in dirty clothes leaped out from the shadows. His appearance had changed drastically, but I recognized his voice. It was James.
Stay back. Okay.
Deborah was terrified. I stood between her and Brian, guarding them from James.
What's this all of a sudden?
You ruined my whole life. The conversation was completely disjointed. James continued to rant.
You took my place. If it weren't for you, give me back my place.
James was growling like a stray dog. I replied calmly. I didn't take it. It was taken from you because you didn't fulfill your responsibilities.
Shut up. I bet you whispered in Dad's ear and had him kick me out.
James, consumed by suspicion, couldn't be reached with words. Deborah asked timidly.
That man, could he be?
That's right. A man who is already considered long gone by society. That's James. However, James himself is still alive, abandoned without any help, all alone.
I shouldn't have bothered with you in the first place.
Another figure appeared. It was Amanda, also in a disheveled state. Amanda pointed at James and shouted.
I only gave you a chance because you said you were a rich boy, but now you've fallen to being just a jobless bum. Then get away from me. Having you around is just a nuisance when you can't even cook.
He retorted back at Amanda, not backing down. Amanda's face contorted even more with anger.
What are you saying? I can't get a job because your father leaked my information to corporate executives. Take responsibility. That's because you got greedy beyond your status.
The two endlessly complained about each other. Truly, weren't they a perfect match no matter what?
They're suspicious people. Someone call the police.
I grabbed Deborah's hand and started running. Right now, the two of them were absorbed in each other in a sense. It was now or never to escape.
Hey, Dorothy! Don't you run away, you coward.
I felt the two of them chasing after us. Hearing the commotion from inside the office, male employees and security guards came rushing out. Before long, the two were restrained by the sturdy security guards. James shouted in frustration.
I didn't do anything. So why am I going through this?
Doing nothing is your problem. I said that, as if spitting it out. James and Amanda were taken away by the police as dangerous individuals. From then on, they were forbidden from approaching me and Brian.
Forbidden from approaching my own wife and child? That's ridiculous.
He apparently made that claim, but of course, James was no longer my husband or anything. The more he spoke, the more he creeped out those around him, they say. Amanda also couldn't get a job because William pulled some strings behind the scenes, so she reluctantly stuck with James.
She's the woman who stole James from me and Dad from Brian. I can't forgive her.
William said that, quietly angry.
They're both jobless and struggling to even eat. They don't have any savings from fooling around.
So somehow, they showed up seeking financial assistance or something from me. Despite that, they didn't even apologize to me or anything. Half a year passed since James and Amanda's intrusion. During that time, Deborah returned to her parents' home from the shock, and I ended up taking care of Brian. It was really tough. I'd go see him during breaks and after work to breastfeed him. Just that made me feel like a mom, but the reality wasn't like that at all.
You're crying again, what's wrong? Are you hungry? Or is something wrong with your diaper?
Even when I talked to him, there was no response. He was still a baby who couldn't speak yet. I picked up the sobbing Brian and gently called his name.
Don't cry, Brian.
I wonder if those words got through to him. Brian looked up at me with teary eyes. I'm sorry, Brian, that you don't have a dad. But I'll work hard for both of us. I said that with a prayer. The words still didn't seem to get through. He probably just happened to stop crying by coincidence.
Deborah will take care of you again starting tomorrow.
I got a call from Deborah. She said she recovered from the shock and will return to her babysitting job. Brian is more attached to Deborah, if anything. She spends more time with him and has been handling this difficult childcare. I'm grateful, not jealous at all. But
I'll become a mom you can be proud of.
From now on, I won't just leave it all to Deborah, I'll study childcare too. And so, let's live together, the two of us, with my one and only irreplaceable family.
I'll make you happy for my late wife and son. What?
I almost blurted out. I wondered whose wife and son he was declaring dead. Eavesdropping further, Thomas uttered something even more unbelievable. You're all I have left after losing everything. Will you marry me? I could never forgive Thomas for pretending that his wife and son were dead. To think he would go as far as lying and proposing to such a young woman. Of course, I couldn't just stay silent. When I looked at Brian, he met my gaze and nodded. Then, we stood up and approached Thomas. Hello, your dead former family here. We've come back from the afterlife just for you, Dad. Thomas's eyes widened in shock at our sudden appearance. It was from there that Brian and I began our revenge on Thomas. My name is Chloe. I'm a 48-year-old housewife and have been married for 24 years. I grew up as an only child in a family where both my parents were high school teachers. Although my grandmother took care of me when I was little, I spent a lot of time alone after she passed away when I was in middle school. My parents were often away from home even during summer breaks and other long vacations, as my dad coached baseball and my mom coached volleyball. Seeing my friends' moms at home being housewives or working part-time and being home in the evenings made me envious. So, I decided I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom when I got married and had kids instead of being out at work. Being a quiet person, I never had a boyfriend until I graduated from college. My mom got worried for me, so she introduced me to a young male teacher who was a colleague of hers shortly after I graduated from college. His name was Thomas Jones. He had a nice figure, and he was handsome. According to my mom, he was sociable and well-liked by the students. He seemed too good for someone quiet and plain like me. But Thomas, respecting my mom as a more experienced teacher, took our relationship seriously. A year after we met, Thomas and I got married. Having felt lonely as a child, I told Thomas that I wanted to focus on our family instead of work. He agreed, saying he had felt the same as his parents both worked. He wanted me to stay at home. Thomas and I shared the same values. I thought we could build a happy home together. However, Thomas, being sociable, valued his relationships with colleagues and students. That's a good thing, but he often neglected life at home. We rarely spoke to each other, and when we did, it was only when he had something he needed me to do.
I'm glad that you became a housewife to take care of this household, Chloe. I can rely on you for anything.
Thomas always flattered me like this, leaving everything to me, even things he could do himself. But hearing this made me feel needed, and I tried to take it positively. I suppose it would have been better to get mad at him and say, I'm not just a housekeeper, you know. On top of that, since the beginning of our marriage, he would never be home at night during the weekends. He would usually be out drinking with his colleagues or his former students. Indeed, I had heard from my parents that many teachers would drink to relieve their stress. But my parents were different. My mom didn't drink, and my dad rarely went out for a drink out of consideration for my mom. I realized some teachers really enjoyed their drinks seeing Thomas's lifestyle. But I kept quiet at first because it didn't affect our living costs. However, Thomas still kept it up even after our child was born, so I got increasingly unhappy about it. Hey, Thomas. I get that socializing is important, but can't you say no every now and then? I had kept quiet until then, but I couldn't take it anymore. Thomas looked puzzled and responded, "What? Why are you asking this now? You never mentioned it before." "Well, my parents told me that teachers have a lot of socializing to do. But I want you to value your time at home too, for Brian's sake." I said this for the sake of my son Brian, but Thomas furrowed his brow as if he was offended.
Look, both of your parents are teachers, right? So, if they come across any problems at work, they can talk to each other about it. But I don't have that, so going out with other teachers for drinks is my only option.
Thomas made his point as a teacher. Hearing that made me feel helpless since I didn't work, and it left me feeling lonely. Regardless of how I felt, it must have been lonely for our son, Brian, to have his dad gone every weekend. All I want is for Thomas to genuinely connect with Brian. But Thomas didn't even try to understand my feelings. Despite having these thoughts, I couldn't say anything back to him. Even though I found this frustrating, there was nothing I could do about it, and a rift gradually developed between us. However, our life wasn't entirely lonely. Thomas was well liked by his students, and those who had already graduated and are now working often came to visit him. In particular, 2 of his students, who were the class clowns, have been visiting us frequently in the past 5 to 6 years. Their names are Miller and Martin. They would still come over on their days off even after graduating from college and getting a job. Thanks to them, Thomas has been going out less over the past few years. Brian, now in his senior year in college, has become quite close to them, perhaps because they are around the same age. I feel kind of happy too when they come to visit us with their bright and friendly personalities. They always looked out for me, and would bring over cakes and such. Today, they brought a cake over on their day off. But Thomas had been out since the morning. "I'm sorry, guys. My husband has been out since last night and hasn't returned yet." They looked a bit awkward when I greeted them at the door. Perhaps they felt bad for visiting when Thomas was away. "No, we're sorry for bothering you when Mr. Jones isn't here." "But, is Brian here?" "Brian?" "Yes, he's here." Hearing their voices, Brian came out of his room. In fact, he was getting ready to go out as if he had been waiting for the 2 of them to come. "Mom, I'm going out with the guys for a bit." Brian left with a somewhat burdened expression, along with the other 2. It seemed like they had something they didn't want me to hear. Well, boys their age might have concerns they can't share with their mothers. I watched them leave with a sense of unease but didn't say anything. Later, I passed by Brian's room, and I noticed his phone ringing. It's rare for Brian to forget his phone. I went into his room to pick it up. And without intending to, I touched the screen which wasn't locked and caught my breath. It was a message thread from Miller. He sent a picture showing Thomas with his arm around a young woman entering a hotel. The message read, "I don't want to believe it, but the woman with Mr. Jones seems to be from a club. I secretly followed them after they left." Brian replied, "I'll keep quiet because Mom would be shocked if she finds out." That's probably why they came to see Brian. Or maybe they hoped to figure out if Thomas had returned. Anyway, my mind went into a panic. The thought of Thomas cheating. I had an urge to confront him directly, but I hesitated. Brian was in the middle of job hunting, so I didn't want to trouble him with our marital problems. So, I decided to pretend I hadn't seen the message for now. When Brian returned, he still looked troubled. I greeted him, trying to appear calm. Then Thomas came home. He looked puzzled at Brian and I.
"What's up? You both look so out of it."
An awkward silence filled the air. Brian must have been careful that I don't find out. For a while, Brian and I continued to act as if nothing was amiss when Thomas was around. Months passed, and soon it was almost Christmas. We planned to spend Christmas Eve as a family, celebrating Brian getting a job. However, I was still troubled by Thomas's suspected infidelity and couldn't bring myself to speak up. Then, Thomas said something.
"I'll come home late for a year-end party on the 24th of this month, so I won't need dinner."
It makes sense that there would be a party on that day. But given the date, I couldn't help but wonder if he was lying. Even so, I couldn't confront him about it, so for the time being, I just replied, "Yes." Lately, I haven't had a proper conversation with Thomas, and I feel suffocated every day. Seeing me constantly like this, Brian made a thoughtful gesture for me.
"Mom. Actually, I got 2 dinner vouchers for a hotel where Miller's relative works. It's for the 24th, but let's go together." "Really? You want to take me out for dinner? Don't you have someone else you want to go with?"
I asked Brian shyly in reply to his invitation, but Brian answered as if he was trying hard to come up with an excuse. No, Miller and Martin seem to have plans that day. And my friends from school said they'd be spending it with their girlfriends." I decided to accept the invitation because Brian was concerned about my loneliness. It's been years since I've gone out for a meal with Brian. And it's at a very fancy hotel, so I thought I might dress up a bit. I was looking forward to the day with such excitement, but I never imagined I would encounter such misfortune on that day. And then, on the night of the 24th, Brian and I went to the hotel for dinner. It was more luxurious than I had imagined, and I almost faltered for a moment. I nervously entered the restaurant on the top floor of the hotel and was led to our table by a waiter. It felt more like a place where couples come to propose than a mother and son dining together. Looking around, there were indeed many young couples. In particular, the couple sitting by the window with the woman in very flashy makeup and clothes, and
"Ah!"
I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the man sitting opposite the woman. He was sitting with his back to us, so I didn't realize it at first, but the man was Thomas. Thomas was dressed in a formal suit like I had never seen before. It was probably either newly bought for this occasion or rented. I was frozen and couldn't move from the spot. I think Brian hadn't realized Thomas was there yet, so I tried to act calm. However, since our seats were close, I could clearly hear Thomas's voice.
"I'll make you happy for my late wife and son." "What?"
I almost blurted out. I wondered whose wife and son he was declaring dead. Eavesdropping further, Thomas uttered something even more unbelievable. "You're all I have left after losing everything. Will you marry me?"
"Me? Really? I'm so happy."
The seat was by a large window offering a panoramic night view of the city. She must have been deeply moved by being proposed to in such a romantic atmosphere. Brian, sitting opposite of me, seemed to realize it was his dad's voice and turned around quickly. "Brian, wait." I hurriedly stopped Brian from seeing Thomas's face behind us. But it seemed Brian already realized the man proposing to the unknown woman was his dad. Brian and I silently eavesdropped. Thomas's proposal went on.
"You're the best. After losing my wife and son, I had lost the will to live, but thanks to you, the future seems bright." "Really? You rely on me that much?" "Of course. I'm even thankful to my deceased family because I got to meet you."
Thomas took something out of his pocket with sweet words. It appeared to be an engagement ring. It looked much more expensive than the one he gave me. I could never forgive Thomas for pretending that his wife and son were dead. To think he would go as far as lying and proposing to such a young woman. Of course, I couldn't just stay silent. When I looked at Brian, he met my gaze and nodded. Then, we stood up and approached Thomas. "Hello, your dead former family here. We've come back from the afterlife just for you, Dad." Thomas's eyes widened in shock at our sudden appearance. The mistress, not understanding what was going on, looked surprised.
"Who's this woman? And the mama's boy? Do you know them, Thomas?"
"Who knows? They're total strangers. Just some troublemakers, I guess." Just ignore them. Thomas tried to brush it off, but sweat was trickling down his forehead. The woman glared at us, thinking that Brian and I were just here to cause trouble.
Hey, what's your problem, lady? You can't harass us like this just because you're jealous of our happiness.
It's not harassment. You're being deceived. This man is Thomas. He's my husband.
Oh, sure, the name matches, but does that prove he's your husband? If you're going to make baseless accusations, I'll call the police.
We have proof right here, Brian said and took an envelope out of his bag. Inside was our marriage certificate. Arya, the mistress, grabbed it and showed it to Thomas.
What's this about, Thomas? You said you had lost your wife and child.
Confronted by Arya, Thomas shrunk back, unable to say anything. That was when I wondered. Why had Brian brought something like that? Noticing my puzzled look, Brian seemed to catch on to my question. Then, looking at Thomas, he said, "Dad, I've known for a while now that you've been cheating on Mom with this woman. And I found out you'd be meeting her here today."
What are you talking about?
Thomas still tried to play dumb at this point. What an awfully stubborn man.
Ha!
Brian scoffed at those words. There's no escaping it now, Dad. I've got the whole proposal recorded on my phone.
What are you talking about? You don't have one on you right now.
If you're wondering where it is, the attorney sitting over there has it. Brian pointed to a seat where Martin and a man around 50 were seated. Miller emerged from the back of the restaurant. It seemed like they had planned this together in advance to confront Thomas about his affair. I was surprised Brian had orchestrated this. Then, the man with Martin approached us. "Hello, I'm Martin's father. I hear that you have always been very kind to my son."
Oh, Martin's father. It's been a long time.
Well, I believe this is actually the first time seeing you in person, sir. I'm ashamed to say I've left everything concerning my son's school to my wife.
Are you here for dinner with your family today?
Thomas seemed puzzled Martin and his father at such a place. Then Martin, sitting next to his dad, spoke up. "I asked him to be here with me, sir. My father's a lawyer. When I told him I had something I wanted him to look into, he had a friend investigate and found out you'd be here today with your mistress." Thomas looked surprised when he heard that Martin's father was a lawyer and that he was being investigated. Naturally, his guilty conscience must have made him react that way. I had no idea they had gone as far as to involve an attorney and a private investigator. Thomas glared at me sharply.
"Chloe, what is this all about? I have no idea either. Mom has nothing to do with this, Dad. We're the ones who planned everything."
Hearing these unexpected words from Brian, Thomas's eyes widened even more, and he froze in place. I wondered why Brian would go to such lengths. Then, Brian explained how he came to know about Thomas's affair through a message from Miller. Brian had been talking with Miller and Martin about what he could do without me finding out. But the three of them couldn't find a solution on their own, so Martin talked to his father, who is a lawyer. Even though it was a personal request, Martin's father agreed to help and had a private investigator look into Thomas's surroundings. One of Miller's relatives works at the restaurant where Thomas was meeting his mistress that day. They provided the dinner tickets to stake out Thomas.
I wasn't sure whether to bring Mom along, but I wanted to clear things up. I couldn't stand the thought of you and Dad just pretending to be a couple anymore. I couldn't bear it.
So, that's why Brian invited me here. I thought Brian was still a child. Yet, he had been thinking about his parents this much. I was truly surprised to see how grown-up Brian had become before I knew it. As I was lost in thought, Martin suddenly looked at Thomas and made a shocking statement. "Mr. Jones, my father and his friend found that Arya is actually Mia, who was in the same class as Miller and me in our freshman year."
What? Her name is Arya. It even says so on her business card.
That must be a pseudonym for the club. Don't you remember Mia, who dropped out in December of our freshman year? That's her. Upon hearing this from Martin, Thomas looked at the woman named Arya.
Arya? You're that girl, Mia, from back then. What are you talking about? Who's Mia? I don't know any Mia.
Arya was desperately denying it, but she seemed to be panicking. Seeing Arya like this, Martin showed us a photo on his phone. A friend of mine went to the same middle school as Mia, and he showed me the graduation album. I took a photo of Mia's picture with my phone. Look at the large mole under the left eye. Isn't it the same as yours? Martin pointed at Arya's face. Arya covered the area under her eye with her hand, but it was too late. She gave up and smiled wryly.
If I'm caught, so be it. Yes, I'm Mia, the one who couldn't stand being in Mr. Jones's class during my freshman year of high school. The Mia who was driven out of school because of such an awful homeroom teacher.
The room went silent at Arya's drastic change in demeanor. What was she plotting by getting close to Thomas? As I pondered this, Thomas questioned Arya before I could.
Driven out of school because of me? What do you mean? You probably don't remember. To you, I was just a mere shadow.
Arya began to recount her time back then. She couldn't fit in with the class and was isolated since her first days of school. She also struggled with her studies. She tried to consult with Thomas, her homeroom teacher, who never took her seriously. Although Thomas was well liked by his students, he tended to be favored by the popular ones. So, it was quite possible that, on the flip side, he didn't pay as much attention to the shy, quiet students who didn't stand out. Just as he had been neglecting me at home. I found myself feeling a bit sympathetic towards Arya, even though she was the one Thomas was cheating on me with. Listening to her story, Martin's father placed his hand on her shoulder as she tearfully recounted her high school days.
I understand your pain. But why did you decide to date Mr. Jones without revealing your true identity?
Arya answered, wiping her tears away with her hand.
I wanted to get back at him. I thought making him cheat on his wife would destroy his family. He happened to come to my club as a customer, so I coaxed him into picking me. He didn't know who I was, and I thought if his wife found out he was cheating on her with a girl from the club, she would divorce him.
While I felt sympathy for Arya, I felt that her plan was over the top. Cheating is cheating, no matter the reason. Thomas, who had been close to Arya until moments ago, now looked at her with suspicion.
You played with my feelings for such a reason? What about my feelings?
Thomas exclaimed as if he was the victim. I couldn't stand his self-centered attitude and couldn't keep quiet any longer.
Enough! Playing the victim now? Cheating is cheating, isn't it? I've known about it all along.
My sudden outburst caused a stir around us.
What's the matter, Chloe? You're not acting like yourself. I've been keeping it to myself until now. Disappearing every weekend with friends or whatever, and now cheating? I will never forgive you.
I let out all the feelings I had been bottling up inside. Thomas seemed unaffected, showing no signs of remorse.
I was bored at home because you wouldn't talk much. So, I ended up accepting invitations from my colleagues or taking my students out for a drink when they asked me for advice. I'm a teacher, after all. It's not my fault. So what? Both my parents were high school teachers, and they cared for my family. You're just making an excuse. It would have been great if you were a teacher too, but anyway, I felt uncomfortable being with a wife like you with nothing to talk about. So, enough, Dad. You're embarrassing us.
Brian's blow silenced Thomas immediately. Martin's father, witnessing the whole scene, tried to calm Thomas down.
Mr. Jones, I heard from my son and my late wife that you are a good teacher. However, family is irreplaceable. I lost my wife 2 years ago, but you have such a wonderful wife. Please cherish the time with your family from now on. No, that won't be necessary. Let's end this. I've already talked to my parents, and they said I can come back home anytime.
I felt bad for interrupting the kind words offered to me, but I needed to make my feelings clear. Thomas looked panic-stricken.
What? What about me? I wanted to split up too, but I was deceived by the person I was planning to remarry. Deceived? You were the one lying about your wife and child being dead.
As we were arguing, Martin's father stepped in.
Looks like it would be best to take this to court. Since it was the husband who was having an affair, the wife can claim alimony in the trial. I will also take responsibility and pay the alimony.
Arya, who had been silent until now, seemed to realize the gravity of her actions and offered to pay. Thomas was cornered and had no way out. After the trial, the divorce was finalized. Of course, I was able to claim alimony from Thomas. Arya, or rather, Mia, offered to pay alimony as well, but I declined. I couldn't forgive her for the affair, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. Since Thomas also had a part in her losing her job, I decided to settle things amicably with her. Thomas complained that it was unfair he was the only one paying alimony. He shows zero signs of remorse. Anyway, now that the divorce is finalized, I don't care about Thomas anymore. Later, I heard from Martin and his father that Thomas's affair with a student and our divorce became a rumor throughout the school. The rumor spread quickly among the parents, leading to a flood of complaints to the school. This led to Thomas losing the trust of his students and their parents, forcing him to resign. He tried to find another place to work, but few schools in his area were willing to accept him due to his bad reputation. The only school that offered him a position was located far in the countryside. But Thomas, who had enjoyed popularity, refused, saying he didn't want to be in such an unpopular area. Struggling to find employment and falling behind on rent, he was kicked out of his apartment by the landlord. With nowhere to go, Thomas then attempted to move in with Miller, who was living alone.
Mr. Jones, please don't destroy the respect I had for you. You look pretty pathetic right now.
He was immediately turned away with those words. His current whereabouts are unknown. After the divorce, I moved back to my parents' home for the time being. Brian, having found a job, started living on his own and is now completely independent. My parents wished Brian had lived with them a bit longer, feeling a bit lonely. However, I too will be leaving my parents' home soon. As a matter of fact, I've hit it off with Martin's father since the divorce fiasco, and I'm getting remarried with him. He's a busy lawyer but always makes time for me. I probably won't be lonely anymore. And Brian is very happy for us. I feel like I've been putting up with things in my life for so long. But I've decided to move on from that. Having little work experience, I decided to try something new and became a clerk in my new husband's office. It takes some getting used to at first, but my husband and the rest of the staff are kind enough to give me training for my job. I feel very happy being with someone I love both personally and professionally. Life has become enjoyable for me. Now, it's time to start a new life for me.
Trash housekeeper! Hurry up and prepare the meal!
Instead of worrying about me as I collapsed from dizziness, my husband George shoved me away annoyingly and glared at me with irritation. As his attitude drained the color from my face, I slumped to the floor, leaning against it, while he started watching TV, ignoring me completely. Staring blankly at this unbelievable scene, someone suddenly appeared behind George, blurting out words of surprise to him.
Is that all you have to say?
Right after, George turned around to see who it was and his face turned pale with shock. My name is Marie. I'm a 34-year-old housewife. I've been married to George, who is 5 years my senior, for almost 2 years now. These 2 years have been like living in hell.
What is this disgusting meal? Didn't you learn to cook from my mom?
For the first year of our marriage, I lived with his parents. It was, so to speak, training for marriage. George is an extreme mama's boy, and his mother, Catherine, was what you'd call a zealously educational mom. She was incredibly strict about manners, my rules. No talking back allowed. A perfect example of a parent whose behavior negatively influences their children.
A woman should be this way, and it's only natural to respect your husband. A wife who can't prioritize her husband is just useless.
Raised in such a family environment, George was looking for a wife like his mom, he murmured when we first got married. Unaware of all this, I was easily swayed by his sweet talk, resulting in a hellish marriage.
Marie, what I want for you is to be a devoted wife to George, supporting him. For that, I'll need to be tough on you, to raise you strictly. All of this is to ensure you two can live happily as a couple. Please bear with it.
As Catherine declared, from the day we started living together, she used me like a servant. Doing chores was a given, and reading the room was a must. I had to wake up earlier than anyone in the family, and I wasn't allowed to rest until I had sent everyone off to work. I had to start eating after everyone else and finish before them, or I'd be lectured for an hour. Any slight difference in taste would result in being verbally beaten by Catherine and George. They successfully trained me to be a wife who wouldn't dare defy her husband. Now, I'm scared to even express my opinion to him. If he comes home in a low mood, I spend the mealtime trembling in fear. What part of this is a harmonious family life? Now, I only have doubts, but back then, I was completely disheartened and didn't even have the energy to think about it. It's like you can't do any household chores properly. What has your mother taught you?
At this rate, it would be easier to train a stray cat.
About a week after starting to live in my in-laws' house, Catherine's true nature began to show, and from that moment on, I was subjected to daily sarcastic comments. Cleaning the hallway with a rag was the norm. Not a speck of dust or dirt was allowed. It was natural to serve homemade food to your husband. No matter how hard it was, cutting corners was not allowed. To top it off, I was told to do the laundry by hand. Even though there was a perfectly good drum washing machine right in front of me, I was not allowed to use it.
For a housewife who has time on her hands, seeking convenience is outrageous. A housewife is supposed to suffer through hand pain. You're the first daughter-in-law I've seen who only learns to take it easy.
While complaining loudly, Catherine effortlessly used the drum washing machine right in front of me. Unable to endure the overly harsh environment, I once cried to George for help, but he refused to listen to my concerns.
How could you insult someone's mother like that? What kind of education did you receive to grow up into such a person? My family is perfect. Maybe it's your fault that mom has to discipline you so harshly?
George never acknowledged any fault in his mother. Instead, he frequently misused the word discipline, as if he thought of me as no better than a dog or a cat.
Mom is right. There's nothing wrong with what she says.
It's like he's a follower. Completely brainwashed, he wouldn't even pretend to listen to me, settling everything with "it's all your fault." This was also reported to Catherine, and from the next day I was forced to go shopping on foot. I was not even allowed to use public transport for shopping trips, no matter how far. I had to walk everywhere.
From now on, live your life in a dress. The disorder in your lifestyle stems from your behavior. Welcome your husband home in a dress. Eat all your meals standing up. I won't allow you to sit in a chair.
The level of harassment I faced as his wife was beyond what could be dismissed with just a quaint word. I thought about running away, unable to endure any longer, but I had no parents, and my only sibling, my brother Tony, was married and living in India. I had nowhere and no one to turn to for help. I cried every day and night, gradually wearing down mentally. By the time we finished our marriage training and started living together, I was emaciated. I was drained physically and emotionally. "Honey, please." I feel sick. Can you let me go to the hospital? About a week after we started living together. I hadn't had my period, and I was plagued by daily nausea and headaches. I decided to talk to George about my poor health. There was no chance of pregnancy since we hadn't been intimate since getting married. If not that, then perhaps it was indeed an illness. The headache was too severe to even get up, and my body felt weak and unresponsive like anemia. My condition was clearly severe, beyond what could be endured quietly. When I spoke to him with a pale face, he responded with annoyance and refused my request.
What do you mean by feeling sick? Be specific. You're always lacking in details. Are you even thinking before you speak? Raised spoiled by your parents, that's why you ended up like this. Thinking others will understand your feelings with just a little hint, that's why you can't manage yourself. I'm tired, you know. Don't waste my precious time with your words. Make your point quickly and specifically. Don't irritate me with every little thing.
Hearing his sarcastic complaints made my ears hurt and worsened my headache. I regretted getting married in this insane situation. He never showed any signs of this behavior while we were dating, but as soon as we got married, this happened. He used to be kind, always sincere, and full of charm, popular at work.
Marie is really clumsy and can't be left alone.
I worked at the same company as George. When I got the job at this major company after studying hard, Tony was so happy that he cried. At that time, my parents were still alive. So when I got the job, Tony came back from India for me, and we spent time together as a family. If you ever have any trouble, call me anytime. Even if we're apart, I'm still your brother. Tony, 7 years my senior, really doted on me. There were aspects of George that reminded me of Tony, which drew me to him. He was caring, laughed off my clumsiness, sincere, smart, and a reliable big brother figure to everyone. He was someone I admired. With the headache, nausea, and dizziness, I'll go get some medicine from the hospital, so please, could you give me some money for the consultation? I couldn't feel a trace of his kindness from back then. Not a speck remained. Now, he seemed like a completely different person. Cruel to the point where the word brutal fits, not seeing me as a person. He looked at me with a scornful gaze, as if he was looking at trash, instilling nothing but fear in me.
It's all just indulgence.
What? I didn't expect to receive any money honestly, but I was at a loss for words at his unexpected response.
Living as a housewife, being pampered, and yet you complain? Where in your lifestyle do you find the cause for dizziness, nausea, headaches? It's all just excuses to avoid doing household chores.
That's not. I didn't mean that.
Not working outside, and you talk about headaches. That's laughable. Just take some over-the-counter medicine and get over it. I won't allow a waste of money.
The household finances were entirely managed by George's salary. He confessed before we got married that he couldn't do anything around the house and wanted me to handle the household chores as a housewife.
Don't worry about money. Whether we have 3 or 4 kids, I'll earn enough working outside. I want you to do what I can't.
Even I, as unreliable as I was happy to be of help to him. I had no hesitations about leaving my job if it meant being his support. I believed we would have a happy life together. But this was the reality that awaited me. I became like a bird trapped in a cage, forced into a constrained life.
Enough, someone, please help me.
After George, who wouldn't even consider my illness, stormed out of the living room in anger, I collapsed on the spot and cried. I was overwhelmed by a ceaseless flow of sorrow, lacking the will to fight back. I wanted to disappear. If I had to stay here, I'd rather end my life. Mentally and physically cornered, I left the house without telling him, heading outside. Walking for a while, I unknowingly passed near where my childhood home used to be. Having run out barefoot, I realized my feet were in tatters. I couldn't walk any further. It was a slightly chilly autumn. I was lightly dressed, so the cold wind made me shiver. What would happen if I just let the cold take me? Could I find an easy way to the next world? As I collapsed in front of the empty house that used to be mine, I lay down on the ground. I couldn't think of anything. I didn't want to. I just wanted to disappear. That's when I heard it. Through my hazy consciousness, I heard someone calling me.
Hey! Hold on! Open your eyes!
Feeling a sense of nostalgia for the unknown voice, my consciousness faded away. I woke up to find myself lying on the bed. Having shone an unfamiliar ceiling and slowly opened my eyes to a warm room and the smell of delicious bread. As I tried to sit up and look around to grasp the situation. Awake now? A slightly older man who felt strangely familiar stood there. As I felt wary of this person I didn't recognize, he saw my fear and laughed heartily.
What, you don't remember? Well, no surprise there. It's been over 20 years, after all.
Hearing his cheerful laughter and words, a memory flashed in my mind.
Could it be Mike? Spot on. Long time no see, Marie. I was passing by your family's old house and saw you collapsed. Seriously freaked me out. What were you doing there?
Mike. My childhood friend and Tony's best friend, with whom I used to play until middle school. He moved away when we entered high school, and though we lost touch, he and Tony had remained in contact, and apparently, he had heard a lot about me. Now, he's the owner of a transport company and a father of 2. I never thought Mike would be here.
I was visiting my grandma's grave with my family and decided to take a trip here. More importantly, what happened? You were so cold when I found you, I rushed you to my parents' house.
Mike's wife, Lily, a nurse, had assessed my condition and decided it was safe for me to rest, so they took me to Mike's parents' house. There, he kindly listened to my situation. Lily stayed by my side, crying at the story of a stranger, and hugged me, saying how hard it must have been.
Unforgivable. Someone who can't see others as people should be left immediately.
I also want to escape that house. But I have no relatives or friends to turn to. Lily's words were exactly what I had been thinking. But she understood my situation as well. Tears flowed as I spoke of my hardships, and she was visibly troubled, searching for words.
If you had a place to live and a job, would that solve the problem?
Huh? Hearing our conversation, Mike suddenly asked this, leaving me puzzled, unsure of what he meant. Then, he made a call, and after finishing the conversation, he turned to me with a bright smile.
Marie, we will definitely help you out. So, you're leaving that house. I'll support you.
Confused by what he meant, Mike showed me a reassuring smile, signaling he's got this. Little did I know at that moment, this would be the start of my fight back. After hearing my situation, Mike took me in until my condition stabilized. Lily called George, and probably because it was someone else intervening, he didn't try to forcefully take me back. Being away from George seemed to have stabilized me mentally, and my physical condition improved somewhat. However, Lily strongly suggested I visit a hospital.
Marie tends to endure too much, thinking you can handle it, but don't underestimate the illnesses that come from mental stress. Once this is all settled, we must go to the hospital. I'll come with you.
Her genuine concern was evident, and I gratefully accepted her kindness, prioritizing my rest for the time being. A week passed, and Mike said everything was ready, suggesting we go back to my house once.
If anything happens, call me right away. I have my mobile phone.
Mike, thank you for everything. Encouraged by his dependable words, I decided to return home. Mike accompanied me to the entrance, where George, flustered, welcomed us.
Marie, are you okay? How's your health? Anything wrong?
George, unlike his usual stern self, seemed to be playing the devoted husband, concerned for my well-being. His drastically changed demeanor filled me with fear. He hugged me as if to take me away from Mike, letting out a sigh of relief.
Marie, I was wrong. I failed to empathize with your suffering, and I'm responsible for the pain I caused. I'm truly sorry. Thank you for coming back.
Frozen by his unexpected words, I met Mike's gaze, who silently mouthed "be strong" to me before discreetly leaving so as not to arouse George's suspicion. Once Mike was out of sight, George stepped back and, ruffling his hair in frustration, let out a big sigh.
You know what you've done, right?
His words, muttered with annoyance, froze me with fear. His tone was now cold, as if he was bothered by the inconvenience I brought. Hesitant to enter, George forcibly pulled me inside and roughly let go of my hand.
Relying on some guy I don't even know. I never thought you were such a shameful woman.
His hurtful words brought tears to my eyes. Despite my resolve to be strong upon returning, his gaze and harsh words made me tremble uncontrollably. I'm scared. I want to leave. It's too hard. As these thoughts swirled in my heart, my vision darkened with dizziness. As I leaned on him, about to fall, he pushed me away in disgust, spitting out words with annoyance.
Stop with the act. I don't even want to touch someone as filthy as you.
Pushed by him, I stumbled against the wall and collapsed in the hallway. Without a care for me, George turned on the TV, lounged on the sofa, and ordered me to do housework.
Housekeeper, get the meal ready. Because of you, I haven't had a decent meal in a week. Cooking and laundry are all you're good for, so hurry up and get it done.
Looking around, I saw piles of laundry and dishes left out. The house in complete disarray. I can't do this anymore. I can't go on with this person. I want a divorce. Just as I thought this, someone approached George from behind and spoke up.
Is that all you have to say?
Shocked by the familiar voice, George slowly turned around to see the person standing there, his face draining of color.
Tony! Why are you here?
There stood Tony, supposed to be in India, his presence bringing panic to George's face.
Never mind that. What the hell have you been doing to my sister, huh?
Tony's intimidating presence made George tremble with fear. Tony, who had been working in civil construction in India, had grown bigger and more robust since leaving the US. It was no surprise that George, with his slender frame, would be intimidated by Tony's approach. Especially considering Tony's disdain for people who behave inhumanely. George's actions were unforgivable in Tony's eyes, making his anger entirely justified.
No, I was just educating my wife or guiding her. I never knew that pushing a sick woman was part of educating your wife.
George desperately tried to justify his actions. At that moment, Mike, who had supposedly left, peeked into the living room, flashing a refreshing smile and addressed George.
What are you doing here? How did you get in? How? The door was unlocked. You have to check these things. Even with autolock, it won't work if the door isn't properly closed.
What he pulled out was a thin handkerchief, stained as if it had been wedged in something.
No way! When you hugged me, I dropped it on the floor so the door wouldn't close. That way, Mike and the others could easily get into the house later.
Supported by Lily, I managed to stand up, despite feeling dizzy. George's expression, as he alternated between looking at me and Tony, was filled with panic and fear. Realizing the trick Mike and I had used to enter and that this had been planned from the start left George in shock. He had always left security concerns to me, so it was clear he wouldn't have checked the lock himself, assuming the door would lock automatically. He never worried about it, which was easy to predict.
I've heard all about it from Marie and Mike. You seem to have taken good care of my sister while I was in India. I've recorded this entire conversation. Marie has been meticulously keeping a diary of everything, and we've recorded all texts and calls from you. All of it has been submitted to a lawyer. We'll be demanding compensation for everything, including Marie's health issues. From now on, you'll deal with a lawyer regarding the divorce. Don't you dare come near our family ever again.
Everyone glared at George, protecting me and ensuring he had no allies. Tony spoke for me, preventing George's sweet words from swaying me. Hearing the word divorce, George became frantic, reaching out to cling to me. Wait. Please reconsider the divorce. I can't live without Marie. I need her to survive. George desperately tried to portray himself as pitiful. It was clear he needed me for various reasons, but his words no longer reached me. His true intention was to use me, to live comfortably at my expense, and to vent his frustrations on me. I knew what his sweet words really meant, and I wouldn't be fooled again. Mike and Tony bravely intervened to stop George's desperate attempts to win me back. From behind them, I finally voiced my long-suppressed feelings towards George with a coldness I had never shown before.
With you, I never had a moment of happiness in our marriage. It was a daily struggle, thinking only of escaping. Who would want to stay in such a home? I want nothing to do with you from now on. Don't you dare come near me or my loved ones ever again.
Perhaps because I had never shown my emotions like this before, George stopped resisting in shock. Overwhelmed by the reality before him, he collapsed, drained of all strength. Thus, I was finally freed from George's malevolence, and decided to move to India with Tony. After things settled down, I went straight to the hospital with Lily by my side, and was diagnosed with depression. Mike suggested that it would be best for my recovery to stay at his place for a while before starting a new life, and I gratefully accepted his offer.
We're here for you. You can rely on us for anything. If that husband of yours tries to barge in, I'll kick him out myself. Just leave it to me.
Tony and I deeply appreciated their reassuring words and kindness. The reason for Tony's return to US was a call from Mike, who had been on the phone with Tony at that time, informing him of my situation and convincing him to come back immediately.
Why didn't you rely on me?
Although Tony scolded me upon his return, knowing I struggled to ask for help, he also apologized for not coming to check on me sooner in US and hugged me tightly, apologizing repeatedly. Thanks to Tony's quick actions in arranging a lawyer and accommodation, the situation was resolved smoothly.
From now on, live with us over there. Learning a foreign language might be tough, but my wife and friends will give you all the support you need, so don't worry.
Saying so, Tony offered me a job at his company, where his colleagues welcomed me warmly. As for George, he and his mother were sued for moral harassment by us and are now chased by debts. After explaining everything to my former colleagues before leaving US, George lost his position at his company. Losing his credibility, life at the company became difficult for him, leading to his resignation. He now lives at his parents' home, scraping by on day-to-day jobs. He sent me a letter of apology which said the incident taught him that bad actions come back to haunt you. But of course, I couldn't trust his words and made sure to receive compensation from him. My long-living health finally came to an end. Now I live a comfortable and joyful life in India, surrounded by kind people.
Do you really have a lot of savings?
Those words from my husband Weston gave me a bad feeling. I have a separate savings account, in addition to our joint account. When I was working, we used to communicate how much we were saving from time to time. But since I retired, our living expenses were covered by the pension, so I didn't bother telling him about my savings. I decided to use this money in case one of us got sick or if there was an absolute need. Yet recently, Weston seems obsessed with money. He's been wastefully spending on solo trips and flamboyant, expensive clothes he would never wear. I already know why his spending has become so reckless. Clenching my fists in frustration, I gritted my teeth.
No, $450,000. It's all in the safe.
As soon as I said that, Weston's face blatantly lit up.
That's all I wanted to know.
Without saying much more, he left, looking pleased. He's probably planning to take my money. All this time, he'd say things like, "A woman like you working hard is creepy." Or, "Hand over all the money you earn to me." After all, he criticized me on a whim. In the end, he turns to someone else's money when he's insecure about his future. How dare he leech off my money while he's been demeaned me? I won't let that happen. A sense of revenge started to grow within me. I'm Evelyn. Born into a family of doctors, I was expected to become one just like my parents. Luckily, I loved studying, and apart from the pressure from my parents, I had a desire to save lives as a doctor. I couldn't forget the kind female doctor who treated me when I was hospitalized with pneumonia as a child, and I always admired her. After graduating from medical school, I proudly became an internist. My parents, also internists, would have preferred me to be a more active surgeon. But in the end, I think it was good that I was able to take over their hospital. Being able to face patients at an easy pace must have suited my nature. Thanks to this, our hospital thrived, and a few years later, I got married. That's when I married Weston. It wasn't a love marriage, but rather through an introduction by acquaintances, so our relationship was neither particularly close nor bad. However, Weston, a bossy husband, really hated the idea of his wife working. Probably it because he worked in a factory and was concerned about earning less than me. Thus, his male pride made him act like that. Life with Weston, who believed women should stay home and not work, was painful. Does it really matter who earns more in a marriage? Of course, I rebelled, ignoring such views and continuing my duty as a doctor.
You dare defy me, although you are a woman?
Whenever we argued, "You're a woman," Weston always said. It was always like that.
Don't slack off on housework because you're a woman. Don't work all the time because you're a woman. Don't earn more than me because you're a woman.
Looking back, I think Weston felt inferior to me from that time. It seemed that he oppressed me condescendingly to relieve stress. Had I been a weaker woman, I surely would have been dominated by Weston. Being strong-willed, I constantly fought with him. However, our relationship, which was developing cracks, began to heal with the birth of our son Austin 2 years into our marriage. Children are a source of joy, and they were exactly that for us. Weston, by doting on the kids, could forget his hatred towards me, allowing me to work guilt-free. But when Austin expressed his desire to become a doctor, Weston's hostility turned towards me again.
He wants to be a doctor like you? I'm worried about his future. A hospital run by a woman is bound to be no good. Hey, why would you say that? I'm just working for the family. Do you enjoy always tarnishing my honor? Is earning money that great? Would you be happy if I ran out of money and we couldn't make ends meet?
Such arguments were common. I thought everything he worried about was ridiculous. Money shouldn't matter whether earned by a man or woman, and I couldn't understand his pride in wanting to dominate. However, he did love Austin, so that was a relief. I was fine with being the only one disliked by him. Austin grew into a fine young man and went to medical school. After graduation, he worked at a university hospital, fulfilling his dream of becoming a doctor. And after working there for over a decade, he took over the hospital when I retired.
I'm going to do my best as an internist at Mom's hospital.
Austin, you don't have to push yourself. Do what you love most.
I've always wanted to be like Mom. I'm actually really happy to take over the hospital.
I was so moved by his words that I felt tears of joy. At the same time, I noticed that Weston's look towards me and Austin had shifted from hostility to resentment. For Weston, respect should be for the father, and the mother just a supporting role. Honestly, I considered divorce. But bringing it up could infuriate Weston, and more importantly, I couldn't do it thinking of Austin. So, we entered our old age with an awkward relationship. Life alone with Weston was quieter than I expected. We hardly talked or went out together. Just watching TV in the same space or eating the meals I cooked. Compared to when I was juggling work, housework, and childcare, it was relatively peaceful. No more nagging about how women are or how much I earn. Since Austin took over the hospital, Weston stopped snapping at me, and considering how I was always belittled before. Because you're a woman. These times were quite peaceful. With Austin grown up and me retired, we finally had a trouble-free daily life. But then the unexpected happened. Weston started to leave the house frequently. At first, I thought he was just going for walks during the day, but it seemed not to be the case. He'd been gone from morning to evening, sometimes not returning home for a whole day. I didn't want to suspect a man in his 70s, but I had a terrible feeling. And not just that, unbelievable amounts of money were being withdrawn from our joint account. It wasn't through credit card use, so I had no idea what for. We get our pensions, but withdrawing nearly $1,000 every month would make life unsustainable. I confronted Weston.
Hey, why are you withdrawing so much money? This account is for rent and living expenses, something we made together. I'm in trouble if you use it selfishly.
Faced with my accusations, he laughed mockingly, as if exasperated.
A little bit should be fine, right?
We have plenty.
What if we run out when we need it? Are you going to cover the money you spent? Shut up.
That's why I hate you.
Acting all high and mighty, although you're a woman.
After a long time, I heard it again. You're a woman. That line. I've always just let it slide without talking back, but his words are terrible. If I ever said, "Because you're a man," he would forget his own words and definitely get angry.
It's not okay at all. It's not just your money. You're supposed to have your own personal savings account.
When I said this firmly, he was at a loss for words. We each have our own savings accounts. The joint account is for necessary expenses like living costs and rent, while the savings accounts are for personal savings. We made this arrangement due to Weston's whim of not wanting to be upset by my income. So, the rule is, if we want something, we use our own savings account. He, withdrawing money from the joint account, is breaking the rules.
Listen, if you withdraw a large sum again, I won't put my pension into the joint account anymore. What? Are you even a wife?
Weston was furious as if I were being unreasonable, but I didn't change my stance. Why should I allow him to freely use the money meant for our married life? Normally, you'd consult beforehand or replenish if you spend extra. Nevertheless, I couldn't ignore his reckless spending. I decided to secretly investigate where the money was going. One day, I followed him when he went out and saw something shocking. There, in the city, waiting for someone, was him, approached by a woman. She looked young, both in appearance and dress. After talking for a while, the two of them started walking through the busy streets, arm in arm. I couldn't believe it but continued to follow them, knowing I might never learn the truth if I lost sight of them. They entered an inconspicuous cafe in an alley.
Hey Weston, for my birthday, I want the new bag from that brand.
Ah, sure. I'll buy anything for you, Kelly.
Yay! You're so reliable, Weston.
In the noisy cafe, I could hear a young, cute voice contrasting Weston's gruff one. The woman sitting across from Weston looked to be in her 30s. From their conversation, they seemed to be in a close relationship.
Hey, aren't you going to leave your wife yet? I'm waiting for you to get a divorce, you know?
Sorry about that. She doesn't want to split up, and it's troubling me.
Your wife is a doctor, right? And she's got a tough personality?
That's right. Always looking down on and disrespecting her husband, the worst kind of woman. They laughed and joked about me, their crude laughter filling the air. Strangely enough, it seemed they planned to live together. He was timing his divorce with me for that purpose. It made no sense. We were already in our 70s, and he was planning to be with such a young girl. Was Weston using our living expenses to provide for this woman? Normally, one would realize they're being scammed, but his judgment seemed clouded. It's improbable for such a young woman to fall for a man decades older. Besides, my dad's still in the retirement home, and considering his future care, I need money. My wife is a doctor with more than enough money. I'll divorce to be with you after taking that money.
That will shock your wife so much that she'll be sick in bed.
That woman? As long as I get the money, I don't care what happens to her. Listening to their conversation, an immense rage boiled inside me. Since then, I started gathering evidence, but the mistreatment towards me didn't stop there. Do you really have a large sum in your savings? One day, out of the blue, Weston asked me. I had a very bad feeling about it. I have savings, but it's something I've accumulated on my own, so I never bothered telling him after I retired. As he wants to know my savings, it probably means he intends to take them. Without changing my expression, I answered. $450,000. It's all in the safe. As soon as I said that, his face visibly brightened. That's all I wanted to know. Without saying much, he left, looking pleased. I was sure of it. He is only interested in my money. After all this time, he's been saying things like, "A woman working hard is creepy," or "All the money earned should go to the husband." He's been said whatever he wants. In the end, he relies on someone else's money when he's unsure about his future. He belittles his wife and then tries to take her money? I won't let that happen. I felt a sense of revenge growing inside me. The next day, when I went to the living room, there was a piece of paper on the table. It was a divorce application. And when I went to the room with the safe, the black, cold safe was gone. I'm surprised he managed to move such a heavy object on his own. As expected, he stole the safe and left the divorce papers, then left the house. Weston called me on the day he stole the safe. I ignored it as it was too bothersome to deal with, but there were hundreds of calls in half a day, showing his obsession. However, I won't answer his calls. At least not now. In the meantime, I decided to tell Austin everything that happened. I thought he would be shocked to know his real father had an affair and ran off with his mother's savings. However, his reaction was more indifferent than I expected. I figured he might do something like that. He's always been desperate to look down on Mom. Austin had noticed our discord since he was young and saw through his twisted pride. He's very wise and intelligent. But if the safe was stolen, isn't Mom's livelihood in danger? That's okay. There was no money in the safe. Yes, the safe Weston ran off with had not a single dollar in it. Instead, I filled it with the results of the infidelity investigation, as much as I could. Photos of the two together, receipts he had left on the table, and more. He must be panicking now, for the money wasn't there, and realized his affair has been discovered. That's why he's been calling persistently. Moreover, my savings account has hardly any savings in it. Thinking that rent and living expenses must not be delayed, I secretly added money to the joint account since the beginning of our marriage. In reality, he often didn't contribute to living expenses and used it for his own pocket money. Because of that, I ended up paying most of the living expenses and even Austin's childcare costs. I couldn't afford to save money. The account created after marriage is subject to property division, but there's hardly anything to split. I have a lot of money saved from before I was married, but that's not subject to property division, so he can't get his hands on it. I saved it for emergencies, but if I'm divorcing him, there's no need to be frugal.
So, what will you do now, Mom? If you have nowhere to go, you can come to my apartment.
That's okay. I've already moved.
Really?
Yes. I've already filed for divorce. The day after he left, I moved to an apartment I had arranged beforehand. The house originally belonged to him, so even without savings, selling it would help financially.
Mom, if you're getting a divorce, you should consult a lawyer to avoid complications with the property division.
I will. I also need to get compensation in the divorce trial. Austin was surprisingly calm, which allowed me to respond firmly. Just knowing he'd support me if needed was empowering. Following Austin's advice, I consulted a lawyer about property division and compensation for the divorce trial. Since the safe was stolen, I was advised to report it to the police, so I decided to file a theft report. Now that it's come to this, I'm determined to thoroughly punish Weston. When I was ready to fight, he unexpectedly showed up at my new apartment. Luckily, I could find it was him through the door.
How do you know where I live? What do you want now?
Hey! How dare you deceive me? There wasn't a single dollar in the safe.
Oh, you have the nerve to say that when you committed theft?
And you left the house to move out. It seemed he had located me using a detective. What a waste of his little money. And what about those photos? Stop dragging Kelly into this.
I'm the one who got dragged into this. You dared to misuse our living expenses. I'll make sure you pay the compensation in the divorce trial.
He gasped in surprise because of my strong stance and the mention of compensation in the divorce trial. Then he suddenly changed his tone, speaking weakly as if pleading.
Hey, you haven't filed the divorce papers, right? We're married, let's stop this silly fight.
What? I couldn't help but respond with a voice filled with anger. He shrank back as if scared, but I didn't feel a bit sorry for him.
This is not silly to me at all. And I've already filed for divorce. We're not a couple anymore.
What? How dare you?
You're the one who left the divorce papers and left, right? Selling that house should cover the compensation in the divorce trial. If you come to the house again, I'll call the police.
After ending the conversation through the door, he lingered outside for a while before leaving pathetically. He stole the safe hoping to become rich. Thinking about how long I've been belittled by someone like him makes me angry again. But I can't lose my composure. My revenge against him is just beginning. The claim for compensation in the divorce trial against him and his mistress was successfully made. The woman quietly paid, but he, perhaps reluctantly, keeps trying to negotiate a reduction. I don't plan to reduce the amount by even $1. Considering everything he's done, the compensation in the divorce trial is small price to pay. Eventually, Weston paid the amount I demanded. He had assets like land and money from property division. That probably all went to the compensation in the divorce trial, but now it doesn't matter to me. It seemed he visited Austin to beg for money but was turned away.
I'm cutting ties with Dad. It's embarrassing to have a father who has twisted pride and looks down on others without making any effort himself.
He appears to be thoroughly disliked by Austin now. I realized how closely children watch and remember their parents' treatment of their partners. Austin works tirelessly for the hospital and is still single, saying he's too busy enjoying work to find time for romance. I'd like him to find a good wife, but it's not something a parent should interfere with. I just hope he doesn't end up in a loveless life like ours. A few weeks after the divorce, the safe I had reported stolen was found. It had a keypad lock, but it looked like it had been pried open with a crowbar or something. Inside were charred papers, evidence that something had been burned. Probably he had set on fire either to destroy the evidence of his affair or out of sheer anger. The safe is no longer usable, but I don't intend to ask for compensation. It served its purpose by cutting ties with him, and I don't need another one. Since then, he was unceremoniously dumped by his mistress. Apparently, she hadn't expected the claim for compensation in the divorce trial and was furious.
I wasted money because of you.
Blaming him for wasting her money. He seemed serious about remarrying, but the woman was just in it for transactional relationships and never intended to marry. Logically, a marriage between a man in his 70s and a woman in her 30s with a whole future ahead of her is improbable. Occasional dinners and buying her desired gifts don't make a healthy relationship. He must have wanted to satisfy his ego by showering her with gifts to keep her attention. Now, he is working 3 part-time jobs, struggling to make ends meet and pay the compensation from the divorce trial. Apparently, he is all out of money because of the divorce compensation. He's barely making it with property division and the money from his land property. He managed to rent an old apartment but is living without savings or luxuries, and it's taking a toll on him mentally. As for me, I'm enjoying fulfilling days, occasionally dining out with Austin and becoming friends with neighbors. One happy event did occur. Austin, who had been single for a long time, got married. His wife, a nurse around his age, is kind and warm-hearted. She'll be helping with the hospital's management, so I'm sure they will continue to provide caring medical and nursing services. Most importantly, thanks to her, Austin smiles more than ever. I hope they never end up like Weston and me. May they always be happy and supportive of each other. As for myself, still in my 70s, I want to acknowledge, praise, and live my life happily.